Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the September 27th, 2022 Planning Commission meeting. We have 10 discussion items on the agenda today. I would ask the commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comments so we can move through the agenda efficiently. We start every meeting with the opportunity for the public to comment on an item that is not contained on the agenda. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on an item that is not contained on the agenda? Seeing none, consent agenda is listed on the agenda today, but there are no items there. So moving on to old business, there are 2 items listed under old business today. These items have been previously discussed and we have received presentations and heard from the public. So we will begin with a short update from staff focusing on the revisions to the request. The first item, E.1, is case Z3422 on Hillsborough Street and Grand Avenue. This is a request to rezone approximately 3.05 acres from neighborhood mixed-use 3 stories parking limited and residential 10 to neighborhood mixed-use 5 stories urban limited conditional use. We heard this item at our last meeting on September 13th, where we discussed prohibiting drive-throughs and limiting height on Dorcas and Grand Avenue sides. We'll start with an update on the new conditions from Don Belk.
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the Planning Commission. I will just scroll through. I think y'all are familiar with the location of this site, adjacent to the fairgrounds along the future commuter rail corridor, near that corridor for Hillsborough Street, located in a frequent transit area. The applicant submitted new conditions, and they're shown here underlined, new conditions or revised conditions since you last reviewed the case. Note here that drive-through or drive-in facilities shall be prohibited. And also they have set parameters for a maximum height, providing a measurable footprint, if you will, as to where that height would be situated. So that, I believe, is, well, there's a couple, a couple of additional conditions, one addressing building siding materials to reflect the character of the construction of the neighborhood. There are a number of new homes built in that neighborhood, so this condition would ensure that the character of this of the new development at this location would be consistent with that. And also they have agreed to include vehicle access and ingress and egress along Youth Center Drive right of way, subject to city approval. And that reflects the new conditions. I note that there is bus service at this site, and it did score quite well in our analyses of transportation and energy, with the higher walk, bike, and transit scores, also adding to the housing supply and within walking distance of transit. It is consistent with the future land use map, as we indicated earlier. It's also consistent with urban form and consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. Note these consistent policies. As a result of the conditions, these policies that are underlined are now seen to be consistent with this proposal. Still, no conditions that address affordable housing. So those inconsistent policies remain. Your deadline for action is November 12th, and there are 2 meetings in the interim. That's all. Concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. Next, we'll move on to questions or comments from commissioners if there are any outstanding questions. Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Raines.
Thanks, Chair Fox. Based on the applicant's additional conditions addressing comments, I'd like to, for case Z 3422, I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated September 27th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment.
And do we have a second? Commissioner Rains has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z3422. Commissioner Otwell has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? And any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to the next item, which is E.2, case Z2522 on Corporate Center Drive. This is a request to rezone approximately 13.46 acres from Office Park, 4 stories, Parkway, with Special Highway Overlay District 1 to Commercial Mixed Use, 7 stories, Conditional Use. We last heard this item at our September 13th meeting where we discussed limiting parking between the street and the building and removing restrictions on residential. We'll start with an update from Hannah Reckow.
Good morning. I will jump right to the new zoning conditions. So condition 2, which prohibited residential uses, has been removed, and cap on residential uses of 400 dwelling units has been added to condition 4. And the applicant has also amended the caps on other uses in condition 4. And then the last addition is condition 5, which limits the amount of parking between any new buildings on the site and the street to 2 bays and 1 drive aisle. So this does affect the possible build out. The request would now be introducing residential uses to the site and a sort of slight decrease in potential office space on the site. And so some changes to consistency in the policy analysis. So because the requested district now permits housing, which Office Research and Development does not envision, the request is inconsistent with the future land use map. So an approval of this case would amend the future land use map. And then the addition of some limitation to parking in front of buildings improves the consistency with the urban form map, which it previously was inconsistent with. Overall, though, the case remains consistent overall with the comprehensive plan, and specifically some of those area-specific policies for the Reno Blue Ridge area, wanting parking to not dominate building frontages, are now consistent with the request, and future land use map consistency has been added to the inconsistent policies. So that concludes the staff update. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to questions and comments from commissioners. Are there any outstanding questions? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Rains?
Thanks, Chair Fox. As for the previous one, the applicant provided additional conditions, so I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated September 27th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement for case Z2522.
Thank you. And do we have a second? Commissioner Elder? Commissioner Rains has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z2522. Commissioner Elder has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor and any opposed, that motion passes unanimously. Moving on to new business, there are 8 items on the new business agenda today. These requests have not appeared on a previous Planning Commission agenda, and we will hear a full staff presentation and an applicant presentation. Item F.1, which is case Z2722 on Forestville Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 14.6 acres from residential 4 to residential mixed use, 3 stories, conditional use. Conditions limit certain uses and prohibit stacked apartment units. We'll start with the staff presentation from John Anagnost.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Fox. This is Z-27-22. And so this is the southeast corner of Forestville Road and Buffalo Road, an area that has had a number of rezoning cases and has multiple pending rezoning cases in the area currently. And so this site is currently zoned residential 4, and the proposal is for residential mixed use with a 3-story height and conditions. And so the aerial image doesn't show the development, Bryson Village, that has been completed adjacent to this site. So Bryson Village is primarily single family and then does have townhouses near the corner of Thornton Rose Hill Drive and Buffalo Road. So that neighborhood is completely constructed and adjacent to this site with single family lots adjacent to the site. Additionally, you can see a couple of zoning cases in the area as well as pending development plans. I will add that a new development plan has been submitted in the last 2 weeks in this area for 400 apartment units. And so that is adding to the almost complete development of this intersection in the last year or so. Here you can see Bryson Village and the lots that back up to this site. I will note that there is a natural effective buffer in this area where there is a stream that will prevent development, but there is direct adjacency for potential development to those sites to the south. This is on Forestville Road. So this site is large lot residential currently. Here you can see in the other direction on Forestville Road, and then from within the Bryson Village development. So this is a stub street within Bryson Village. There are zoning conditions here that would limit the overall density and then require apartments to be horizontally attached if apartment buildings are constructed. So essentially they would appear as townhouses and then commercial uses would be prohibited. So the overall density that we produce by that zoning condition restricting the number of units is about 15 units per acre. You can see there, and then some smaller setbacks related to the residential mixed use compared to the current residential zoning. This area does not have great multimodal transportation, so most new residents are going to be dependent on vehicles, personal vehicles for travel. I will note that the proposed development plans in the area do include a grocery-anchored shopping center on the west side of Forestville Road opposite this site, so that may help reduce some vehicle trips or the vehicle miles traveled once that's constructed. Again, no transit here, virtually no bicycle lanes. The Neuse River Greenway Trail is on the west side of 540, so it does require traversing the 540 interchange to reach, which is not comfortable for pedestrians or cyclists. The request would increase the number of housing units potentially constructed on the site and would allow townhouses or townhouse appearing apartments, which is not currently allowed. This area does display a larger proportion of people of color than typical in Raleigh, but otherwise similar economic characteristics to the Raleigh averages. This site has largely historically been developed as large lot residential, no other history identified. The future land use map is moderate scale residential, which does support both the building types and the density that would be allowed by the requested zoning, so it's consistent with the future land use map. There's no urban form guidance, and so fairly simple comprehensive plan analysis consistent with the future land use map, consistent with the comprehensive plan, a small number of largely housing and land use related policies, and then the inconsistent policy, as you might be familiar with from other cases in this area, related to traffic congestion problems, particularly at the interchange of Buffalo Road and 540. And as I have noted in other cases, there is coordination among multiple developers in this area, along with Raleigh Department of Transportation and the North Carolina Department of Transportation, to pursue a restriping program for the bridge of Buffalo Road over 540 that would increase the capacity of that bridge and relieve some of that congestion. And what I've been told by staff from Raleigh Department of Transportation is that NCDOT is now placing caps on the total number of units for some of these new developments until that restriping occurs. Notably, the large development farther east on Buffalo Road that was recently rezoned to increase capacity to 1,000 units. That site, in my understanding, will be restricted to 300 units until the restriping of the Buffalo Road Bridge is completed. So while the zoning in many of these cases suggests a high number of units is possible, there is beginning to be a practical cap on that related to the traffic congestion. So the deadline for you to take action on this is November 26th, and I can take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Anagnost. Next, we're going to hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
I apologize for the delay. There we go.
Good morning, Chair Fox, members of Planning Commission, Worth Mills. On behalf of the applicant, I'm joined by Brad Combs, Megan Ledbetter, and Skylar White with the applicant team. This is a rezoning of 2 properties along Forestville Road from residential 4 units per acre to residential mixed-use 3-story height limit conditional use to facilitate a residential community with a variety of housing types. The property considered for this rezoning is just under 15 acres. The conditions that we have offered to date would limit development to 204 units, which divided by 14.6 is roughly 14 units per acre. We would permit only residential uses within these 2 properties, and we would prohibit stacked apartment units. So as John mentioned, they would appear as townhomes for anybody driving down Forestville or walking or biking down Forestville. This request, along with TCZ 2822, which you will hear following this request, are made together as part of an overall development plan for this southeast quadrant of the Forestville Road and Buffalo Road intersection. The rezoning is consistent with both the future land use map and the 2030 comprehensive plan. As Mr. Anagnos mentioned, these properties do front Forestville Road south of the intersection with Buffalo Road. Bryson Village is both to the south and to the east, and the future public site would be located right here in this southwest quadrant of the Buffalo Road and Forestville Road intersection. There are currently single-family homes on both properties today. They are large lots. They are mostly forested in their current state. Current zoning on these 2 properties are residential use 4 units per acre, as are 3 other single-family properties along Forestville Road. The zoning shifts on both the eastern and western side of Forestville Road as you approach the intersection with Buffalo Road. Other nearby zoning districts, Bryson Village is zoned R6, and the area directly across from this site is zoned residential 10 units per acre conditional use. Future land use map designates these 2 as moderate scale residential. The comprehensive plan states that for the moderate scale residential future land use designation that there should be a variety of housing types, but at a scale consistent with existing residential uses. RX3 is appropriate when controls or conditions that address building mass are included with a rezoning request. The 3 conditions that we have offered to date limit density to 204 total units, or roughly 14 units per acre. We are prohibiting all non-residential uses on these 2 properties, and we are prohibiting stacked units again. So all 3 of these conditions further the comprehensive plan's guidance on that moderate scale moderate scale residential designation. Again, the case is consistent with both the future land use map and the comprehensive plan. We're happy to answer any questions you have and appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Just want to check if there are any members of the public here to speak on this item. Please come forward. A total of 10 minutes on the clock total.
Hopefully I won't take that long. I just want to preface this with I am born and raised in Raleigh, and I watched my elementary school through high school be built in the cow field that I drove past from preschool. The forest behind my house was demolished and built into townhomes. I know development, and I love development because that brings more people here. And so when I kind of voice this concern, this is not coming from a not in my backyard place, but from a place of good intentions and concern for people. I don't know what the final plan is for all of this, but I'm very concerned about the use of the term apartments here because we know that housing is increasingly difficult to come by here. My husband and I were very lucky that we bought our house right before the explosion happened in the last few years. And I'm concerned that when you build an apartment building, you are basically trapping, if there's 40 apartments, you're trapping 40 families into not having a chance at ownership because they're going to be stuck paying rent for the rest of their lives. And I would think it would be better to build, townhomes or single-family, freestanding homes so that fewer people might have a chance to live there, but those people who do have that chance will have a chance at being able to have home ownership, which will set down permanent roots, and they'll really be able to stay and thrive and really become a part of the community. Whereas when you're trapped in apartments, you have to jump when your rent changes, and it, I think, really inhibits a chance at there being not people who just live here, but people who are residents and citizens of Raleigh. And so I would just like to, voice that concern and hope that maybe you guys could place a restriction on it, on these being buildings of ownership and not places to rent, if that makes any sense. Just to give some people a chance at being able to hopefully stay here for the long term. Thank you.
Good morning, Council, and I thank you for your time. The young lady said, about, not her backyard, but my name is Larry Lutz. I live right there on the southeast corner in that trellis court. I know progress is progress. My wife attended and son attended the meeting on March 16th and on April 20th. At that time, I understood in the last meeting that the DOT representative was there, and my road, Buffalo Road, from the end of my property where the apartments are going to the west to the traffic light would be more than likely widened to 4 lanes. I understood that. I was directed and told that, my property in front of Buffalo that goes from the corner of from the edge of the property back to the entrance to Trellis Court would not be widened to the best of their knowledge. Last week, I saw a truck, John A. Edwards and Company, a surveying company, and I came home Monday and I saw 8 flags, ribbons in my yard. I was aware, concerned, not alarmed. I called Tuesday and talked to a gentleman named Mr. Chris from the surveying company, and he said, yes, they're looking at widening Buffalo Road to 4 lanes right there from my property to the traffic line, which I didn't have an issue with. My concern is that he said, yes, he was hired by, the city of Raleigh, I believe, that the scope down the road, the goal is to widen Buffalo Road with a 110-foot right-of-way from the center of the road, taking 55 feet on my side, 55 feet on the other side. I know they just put all new telephone poles for the homes down behind Vision Baptist Church. That's if I went out and measured, 55 feet from the road back, I mean, it's a chunk of my land. And I know progress is progress. He also stated that and I know you're probably all aware of it, about the sewage impact. He says the city has been having major sewer issues on several accounts going from my property going east, to the 290 houses plus or minus behind me, the new homes that are getting built. I've seen the road, and my neighbor's seen the road built up, dug up on Buffalo several times. That's just a concern. We're all on my 6 houses in our cul-de-sac, and I wish they were here, but I understand. We're all on well and septic. I just like to know, are we going to be considered for a sewer line coming in if they take my land? That needs to be addressed. The buffer zone, I appreciate the gentleman saying, behind my property, there could be a 50-foot right of way. I know by legal zoning, you all have to keep so much of your trees. Well, to keep 50% of the trees behind my property for privacy and their beautiful oaks would be appreciated. And it would also save the development, if it does go through, a lot of money than, taking down all those trees and the buffer zone and then having to replant. But the widening of the road is the big issue that I'd like to have addressed. Compensation for the land, should progress happen. Eminent domain, I fully understand. So I've covered the impact of the sewer. A buffer zone with a wall. I've got a small berm there that helps traffic and noise. The widening of the road to the bridge is 2 lanes. I don't see how, as several other people, to put 2 lanes on that bridge isn't going to happen. They're talking about 1 more lane at the meeting that they had. 1 lane could be tight, real tight, bunches of accidents coming. When I'm coming home from work from New Hope coming down Buffalo Road, if I don't hit that window between 4:40 and 6:30, it takes me on a 2-lane road with all the new townhomes west of the news coming in, 35 to 45 minutes to get home. I love the Publix. My wife is excited about Publix and the sheets and the new homes. And then the new apartments going on the northeast corner is not affected by this meeting. 300 apartments are putting on the northeast corner of Forestville. I think I've covered most of my points, and I definitely appreciate your time. And I know I can't fight with progress, but, I just want to be, considered a little bit. Thank you. Y'all have a blessed day.
Thank you for your comments. Next, we're going to move on to questions and comments from commissioners. I'll start off if staff is available to answer the question related to sewage impacts, some perhaps infrastructure inadequacy, if that was noted.
Yeah, I'm not aware of insufficiency of wastewater in this area. I have met with the public utilities staff to talk about the combined strategy for wastewater. And so essentially, the Buffalo Road is a breakpoint for gravity sewer in this area. So property on the north side is going to naturally drain to the north, and property to the south side is going to drain to the south. And so my understanding is that the rezoning case that you've seen recently, Z-39-22, in this property here, is going to have a pump station that's going to pump across their property and across Buffalo Road to reach the Bryson Village gravity sewer, and that will then continue through Bryson Village and continues down to new developments in this area, and then eventually to a main along the Neuse River. So public utility staff have told me that they are aware that the main at the Neuse may need some additional capacity as these developments come online. And the way that works is that each developer is required to conduct a downstream sewer capacity study when they submit a site plan or subdivision plan and perform engineering analysis to establish whether the wastewater system all the way down to the Neuse interceptor, which is the giant pipe along the Neuse that takes it down to the treatment plant, that there's sufficient capacity through that entire portion of the network to serve their development. And if there is not, then they must improve the system in order to create the capacity that is needed for their development. And if they can't improve the system to that degree, then the public utilities reviewers will not approve their development. So there's not really, I don't know of a way of a rezoning case would provide a more stringent standard than that. I'm just, in terms of responding to that particular comment, I think that the Public Utility Department's strategy or policies are pretty effective on that front.
Thank you, appreciate that. While you're up there, John, just a point of clarification. The one item you noted about NCDOT essentially limiting the number of units based on study at time of site plan submittal, that essentially would control the number of units for this particular case as well?
That's my understanding, is that NCDOT would continue that approach to other development in the area. The other thing that affects this particular case is that not this case, but the one to the north, is that there is a zoning condition that limits the development there. This case, would be limited potentially by the infrastructure sufficiency provisions, both in Raleigh's UDO and from NCDOT in terms of their control of their facilities, which Forestville, Buffalo, and 540 are all NCDOT facilities.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Vice Chair Miller? Sure.
Just to address the other questions from the members of the public who spoke, there's a question with respect to the limited use of the new units, whether the Planning Commission or the city could limit the use to owner occupancy as opposed to rental units. I think I know the answer to that question, but I'll turn it over to staff. Could you address that question?
Yes, so the city cannot regulate the occupancy of a residential unit. So we could not accept a rezoning condition that would specify that future units on a piece of property would have to be owner occupied or renter occupied or any combination of those things.
Okay, thank you. And then with respect to the other transportation improvements in the area, is that, do we have transportation available to discuss the transportation improvements infrastructure?
And I will just note that I think the gentleman who made comments is actually most concerned about the next case, TCZ-28. I believe his property is here. And so he's concerned about widening of Buffalo Road because he's between two developments that would also be widening Buffalo Road.
Good morning, Ann Conlon, Transportation. Did you have a specific question about his comments that I can answer for you?
Sure. I saw reference to the restriping of the bridge on Buffalo Road, and it was just, we've had a number of rezoning cases over the past 2 years in this area that's concerned about traffic, and I was just going to see if we could get an update on what the planned improvements are and the timeline, if we know one.
Yes, we still do not have a timeline, so I'll start there. There are multiple developments that are required, as John stated, at a certain number of units to restripe the bridge to 4 lanes and to add a southbound left turn lane on one of the ramps. And that will provide relief in getting dual travel off of 540 and eastbound through that interchange. So that improvement, we have multiple developers working together. They've been in communication with us and DOT, but we don't have a timeline.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bennett?
And while you're up there, the staff report says Forestville Road is 4-lane divided. It's not, is it?
That is the future designation of Forestville Road.
Okay.
So as development occurs, that is the laneage that frontage requirements would lead them to build.
But there's no timetable on that yet.
No, there's no public project to widen out that road
Okay.
this time.
Okay. I'll just say I was encouraged to hear that DOT is limiting build out, but I still have significant concerns about the existing traffic that's already there. I know that intersection, Buffalo and Forestville, is terrible now. So even with DOT limiting build out, we're still adding cars. And I still have concerns, especially with no timetable for the improvements. I have concerns about continuing to approve development in this area.
Thank you, I agree. Commissioner Otwell?
I was wondering if Mr. Mills could comment on the motivation for the commercial prohibition as primary uses. I think that I like the density, and I think where we put in density, we ought to look at some kind of mixed use.
Yes, sir. And as I alluded to it, and you'll see it, I think, a little bit clearly or more clearly in the next case that's coming before you. This property here, 0 Buffalo Road, is a request for a text change to zoning conditions. That request is made in conjunction with this rezoning for a strictly residential product. We do anticipate non-residential uses at the intersection of Forestville and Buffalo. So wanting to, create an overall mixed-use project, but with the way that with the way that 0 Buffalo Road is already rezoned, it made sense to split up into a rezoning and then a text change to zoning conditions. But we do anticipate having commercial alongside of the residential that could be, accessed via walking or bike or however you would like to get there.
Thank you.
A follow-up question for staff on that item. The way that zoning condition is worded, would that also prohibit future accessory commercial units, should those be approved? Or would those be allowed by right as something that would be allowable in a residential district?
So accessory commercial units, well, and the term that's actually in the UDO is live work. That was retained. The accessory commercial unit terminology was at the end of that process removed. But live work and home occupation would be allowed in this zoning district, even with that condition being added. The thing I have noted to the applicant about that particular condition is that by limiting it to solely residential uses, in addition to prohibiting commercial and industrial uses, they are also effectively prohibiting civic and institutional uses. So that would prohibit churches and nonprofits that might otherwise be allowed in a residential district, a residential mixed use, from being able to be developed there. So, if that's not in the applicant's plan for development, that's their prerogative, but just something I have highlighted for the applicant.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Do you have any follow-up on that one, Commissioner Otwell? Okay. Are there any additional questions or comments?
Just a quick follow-up on transportation. I know that we don't have a timeline for the road improvements yet, but could the transportation staff speak a little bit more to what the process looks like and where we are in that process?
Sure. So there are 3 developments that are responsible for that striping at some point. 2 of them are in our jurisdiction, and 1 of them is in Nightdale's jurisdiction. So I can speak to ones in our jurisdiction. Rivertown is a subdivision further east. They are, I believe, still in subdivision review, but actively working through the review process. And they are the development that at the 300th unit would need to have those improvements on the ground. So as they continue through the development process, when we got to the approval step past that 300th unit, we would need to sign off on those improvements before they would get another permit. The other development is on the southeast corner that you see on screen with the next case, I believe, in the agenda. They are required as well to make that improvement before, I think, who's the case planner for that one? I don't want to misspeak. 40 units. Okay, before they're, okay. So early on in their program, they're required to make that improvement. So I anticipate, as whoever gets closest to their limit soonest will be submitting drawings to the city and DOT. We will review those, and ultimately we'll have to sign off on the improvements on the ground before they can proceed with their program.
So the improvements will have to be completed before they build the new pieces, or just have begun before they begin to build?
Completed before they, in that one example, build their 301st unit.
And will those be paid for by the government or by the private developers, or a combination of both?
They'll be paid for by the private developers.
Okay. So there won't be any additional lag for trying to get into the prioritization formula for the city and
Yes.
CDOT?
Correct. There's no public participation in that requirement.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments from commissioners?
The improvements, Ann, that you're referring to are for the restriping of the bridge. So there
Yes,
is-
restriping of the bridge as well as a new turn lane on one of the off ramps.
is there any discussion going on about improving the intersection at Buffalo and Forestville? Or do you expect that restriping the bridge is going to improve operations of that intersection?
I would say the operations at Buffalo and Forestville are independent of the interchange. There are also requirements at that intersection from multiple developments on the corridor. In particular, the commercial piece on the southwest corner will make some significant widening at that corner. So because the Buffalo Road is designated 6-lane divided, in this vicinity, they will be adding multiple lanes and turn lanes. And then I have a diagram showing a lot of different colors. There are a lot of developments on the hook for requirements at Forestville.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments? Go ahead, Mr. Mills.
Chair Fox, I did just want to note that just spoke with Mr. Crane about the residential condition that we have in the application today. That will need to be revised to allow for minor utilities and some other residential development related types of uses. And so, having to revise that, I think is important for this project moving forward.
And from a timing perspective, I'm imagining that revision could happen in time for the next meeting.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Well, without objection, then I'll recommend we defer this case to our next meeting, which I believe is October 11. Okay. Moving on to the next item, which is item F.2, case TCZ 2822 on Buffalo Road. This is a request to change zoning conditions to remove some conditions that have been made unenforceable or have been superseded by the UDO, and adds or amends conditions to allow auto-oriented uses, more parking along Buffalo Road, and prohibit vertically attached apartments, among other items. We'll start with a staff presentation from John Anagnost.
Thank you. So this site is immediately north of the site that you just reviewed. There are a couple of other parcels that are kind of tucked in between them that are not included in either site, but these are adjacent. And so the request is for a change to the existing change to the conditions on a commercial mixed-use 3-story zoning district. And here you can see the site again. Currently used for open space and agriculture. And so there are a lot of sort of technical revisions that are proposed through this zoning case in the zoning conditions. I'll allow you to review those within the backup materials in your agenda, because again, a lot of them are basically just cleaning up things from the old code that either are superseded by new requirements in the UDO or that we would not enforce today because of a different approach to those approval mechanisms. So I have summarized what I have interpreted as the most impactful effects of the proposed TCZ, which is there is a removal of a prohibition on highway retail. So formerly uses such as gas stations, car dealerships, and vehicle repair shops would have been prohibited. So now those are no longer prohibited and are allowed otherwise in the commercial mixed-use zoning. The applicant has added new zoning conditions which would apply the limited use standards from neighborhood mixed use to those particular uses. So essentially bringing the requested zoning in line with more of an NX district rather than a CX district. The one major difference between the effective requested zoning and an NX district is NX does have a maximum lot size of 10,000 square feet. So CX would allow larger lots, which it could accommodate larger shopping or commercial uses. Another impact of the request is that there were some urban form type conditions that applied in the existing zoning that related to how buildings would front on Buffalo Road and whether parking could be placed between buildings and Buffalo Road. So those have been modified somewhat. There's no urban form guidance for this site, and so that does not have a policy impact. I'm not aware of the original intent of that or what the discussion was in the original zoning case. I think the intent was to try to maybe make it aesthetically more pleasing along Buffalo Road. As Ann noted, Buffalo Road is designated to be a 6-lane avenue in the future, so it's not necessarily appropriate to attempt to have an urban form along a 6-lane roadway anyway. And then the final change to the conditions that is substantive is the prohibition on vertically attached apartments, so similar to the condition you saw in the previous case. So the development totals you see here are written into the existing zoning conditions and would be retained. There is an additional zoning condition that would actually restrict the total amount of development to something less than what you see here, unless the restriping project is completed on the Buffalo 540 bridge that Ann mentioned. And so if that is not completed, the actual development would be significantly less than what you see in this table. But this is even when that is completed, a absolute maximum under any transportation circumstances as written into the conditions, both existing and proposed. Again, this area does not have multimodal transportation, largely reliant on private vehicles. This would not increase the potential housing supply. Excuse that error. It would be the same amount of housing, but it does permit a variety of housing types. Same demographic information as the previous case, so it's in the same census tract, so largely economically similar to Raleigh as a whole. There is a small inconsistency with the future land use map at the south end of this site where it is designated for moderate scale residential. The CX zoning that's proposed would encompass the entire site, and so that would make that southern portion of the site inconsistent with the future land use map. Overall, it's consistent, but that would trigger an amendment for that small portion to the neighborhood mixed use designation. No urban form guidance. This is consistent in general with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan, and very similar policy analysis to what you saw in the previous case. And I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Anagnost. Next, we'll hear from the applicant. You may or may not need a full 10 minutes.
Thank you, Chair Fox, Worth Mills on behalf of the applicant. I'll focus on the changes that we're making to the conditions. There is a long list, and I think as John mentioned, you have a copy of that in your packet. But I will say that this text change to zoning conditions creates a much more developable site with regards to consistencies with the current UDO as opposed to the old development ordinance that was in place prior to adoption of the UDO. And because of that, it would create significant positive impacts to that intersection of Forestville and Buffalo Road as it relates to right-of-way dedication and building out that complete street in this southeast quadrant of the intersection. As John mentioned, this request is consistent with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan overall. So the property has significant frontage both on Forestville and Buffalo Road. And so again, development of this property is going to require right-of-way dedication along both Buffalo Road and Forestville Road. It will require pedestrian facilities such as sidewalks, street trees, and create a more pedestrian-oriented streetscape than what you would see there today. Again, the property is vacant, mostly forested. As John mentioned, the entirety of the property is zoned CX3 CU. This was approved in 2009 to the shopping center use, and then that got converted to commercial mixed use during the citywide remapping. Again, a long list of conditions here. I won't cover them all, and I will touch on the changes that we're making that are most impactful to future development. As John mentioned, it is a neighborhood mixed use, predominantly future land use map designation, and so we have tried to create use prohibitions that reflect that, which you will see here. So touching on conditions that we have removed, so removing the required right-of-way dedication reimbursement rate, which is no longer an item that you could include as a zoning condition anyway. We have replaced the natural protective yard to our east with a 50-foot principal building setback, and any healthy trees within that setback must be maintained and preserved as well. We have removed the neighborhood protective yard to the south because that's property that's now being, commonly developed under one development plan. So having accessibility between those units or between those two projects is paramount. We've revised the prohibited use list just a little bit to make it more consistent with the UDO verbiage to date. We have prohibited the vehicle repair major use. That's a prohibited use in NX, and the other two conditions right below that, which limit vehicle fuel sales, vehicle sales rental, and vehicle repair minor to the neighborhood mixed use standards, are also consistent with the future land use map designation. The one condition that I did want to speak more on is condition K here, which reads, until 3 lanes of Buffalo Road Bridge over I-540 are increased by at least 1 eastbound lane, we are limited to 1-story retail uses not to exceed 20,000 square feet. Retail uses within a vertical mixed-use building shall not exceed 40,000 square feet. Office and institutional is limited to 20,000 square feet and no more than 40 residential units on that property, again, until the restriping is complete. So there is some, built-in limitations to development until the infrastructure over I-540 is increased as well. As John mentioned, there was previously or exists today a condition that prohibits parking between buildings in Buffalo Road. That's something that you might see in an urban limited or an urban general frontage. Again, we don't think that's a consistent development pattern based on, as John mentioned, the size of Buffalo Road and just the overall type of development that you're seeing, both to our east and to our west and to our northwest. And then we have also removed the condition that would require at least 2 buildings to be located within 25 feet of either Buffalo Road or Forestville. Again, that's very similar to a condition that you would see with an urban frontage. Lastly, we have included the same condition that we included in Z2722, which would prohibit stacked apartment uses. So any new residential uses on this site would either take the form of a single-family house or a townhouse for anyone driving or walking through the site or adjacent to Buffalo or Forestville Road. As I mentioned, the case is consistent with the future land use maps, consistent with the comprehensive plan, and it does create an opportunity for significant infrastructure impacts at the corner of Forestville and Buffalo Road. Again, happy to answer any questions that you might have, and appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public here to speak on this item? Please come up. Members of the public and those in support have a total, or those opposed have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
This is going to be rather short. I live in the Bryson Village subdivision. I'm excited about the development of these 2 properties, so let's put it out there. I guess it's more of a question. For this property here, we're talking here, 0 Buffalo Road. It's zoned CX, which is great, but is there like a guarantee that we're actually going to get retail there or some kind of commercial development? Because, this feels like the only exit off of Buffalo Road that doesn't have anything going on other than the houses. It makes it'd be greatly beneficial to us to have some sort of retail around. I know that there's the Publix coming in next door, and the one of the reasons we chose this area to live was I saw the future zoning that was planned for this to be all mixed use commercial. I just want to know if there's actually anything written that says this just can't slowly turn into a fully residential property here. Like, will this eventually? Could we get residential creep? You could call it. Or is this guaranteed, like there has to be at least some kind of commercial development on this property? But that's really more of a question, probably more for the guys behind me, though. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. I'll go ahead and just defer that directly to staff.
The proposed zoning would allow solely residential development. It's really that the applicant potentially could offer a zoning condition that would require a minimum square footage of retail development. That would be the discretion of the applicant.
Would the applicant like to respond to that?
Yes, so again, as I mentioned, this property is being developed or plans to be developed with the two properties to the south, where we are focusing all of our residential development. As you can see by the conditions that we've written, that seem to be a little overly restrictive. Based on the conditions that are in place today on the maximum amount of development that can be placed there until the bridge is widened, it seems like a very tight needle to try and thread between including a minimum on retail or non-residential versus the maximum that we could do today anyway. I will note that there are only 40 units permitted on the site until the bridge is widened, which is less than 2 units an acre. And so I think from a practical matter, any development that you're going to see in this location, especially until the bridge is restriped, is going to be retail, and it's probably going to be as close to that maximum as we can possibly get to that point. So I don't think that we need to include a zoning condition that requires a minimum amount of non-residential, but I think you can see based on the related zoning case that we have and the existing conditions that are in this request, it makes it pretty clear that this is intended to be a retail, non-residential type development and portion of the intersection. Thanks.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Miller?
I just want to make sure I understand properly. The Forestville Road and Buffalo Road intersection that we've been talking about for a couple of years being highly problematic, this development, the construction of this development would require that the developer dedicate a right-of-way and construct new vehicle lanes to reach the planned width of 6 lanes on Buffalo Road and 4 lanes on Forestville. Is that correct?
The UDO requirement is that the right-of-way be dedicated to accommodate the full width of the designated street, so 6 lanes for Buffalo and 4 lanes for Forestville. Whether or not the particular development is required to stripe all the maximum number of lanes set forth in a designation is dependent on the particular development being proposed. So they would be required to dedicate right-of-way, construct the streetscape, and probably construct all of the asphalt that would actually allow for the striping of those lanes. As to whether there ends up being, in some cases, as you can see in actually the frontage of Bryson Village, there will be additional asphalt which just has diagonal stripes across it to indicate that it's not a driving area, but that is reserved for future laneage as needed.
Thank you. And if this development were not undertaken, then this road improvement would not occur? Is that correct?
That's right. So that would be a requirement of development of the site. So if the site remains undeveloped, then it would be left to whether or not NCDOT and the city want to conduct a project to do that widening at some point in the future.
Thank you. Well, in that case, I'd just say my comment is I know this has been a pain point for a long time. And obviously this area is getting redeveloped and it needs the road construction, and there will be some growing pains during the road construction process while it's undertaken. But Given the fact that this and the previous rezoning case are, and the development of those sites is what's actually going to cause these road improvements, I am in favor of this case.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners?
Thanks. I just have one quick detail question for the applicant. On the prohibited uses, airfield and landing strip is removed. I just want to know what the intent of that removal is.
Well, I guess first, I don't anticipate this being an airfield or a landing strip. My thought is that, and I'll have to double check, is that it may not be permitted in the CX district anyway, but I can confirm that. I'll try to confirm that quickly. And I will just point out, I guess for consistency's sake, since the previous case was deferred to the next PC meeting, we just asked to defer this one as well so that the timelines match. Thank you.
If there are no other questions, without objection, I'm going to recommend we do in fact do that and defer this item to our October 11 meeting. Moving on to the next two items, I believe will be presented together as they are also tied together. That's item F.3 and F.4. F.3 is case Z3222 on Millbrook Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 2.16 acres from residential 4 and residential mixed use 3 stories parking limited conditional use to residential mixed use 3 stories parking limited conditional use. Conditions limit residential uses and provide for tree preservation. Along with that, you will be presenting TCZ 3322 on North Hills Drive. And this is a request to amend zoning conditions, which lowers the maximum number of residential units and removes the requirement for tree preservation south of Millbrook Road. Please start us off, Ira Miller.
Yep, thank you very much. Ira Mabel, Planning and Development. Just to be clear, these are two cases, so at the end of the day, they will require two different motions and votes. But if I don't present them together, you'll be very confused as to what's happening. So hopefully this is the easiest way to go about that. And feel free to ask me clarifying questions as we go. So these are the two cases. The RX4 and RX3 districts were created by the same zoning request in 2019. I believe it was 40-something. The number escapes me. Anyhow, so the orange districts on this slide are subject to the same zoning conditions today, but should you approve specifically the new case, the number 32, there are conditions specifically for that one. So we'll go through. So there's the number. So this was Z4119. Made this sort of a little bit of an odd zoning district shape, two different districts. And so today we're looking at the text change to zoning conditions, the northernmost one, and then the Z3222 would create a brand new district, which covers the sort of bottom portion of that, and also this new property here is added to that case. Photo of the site on North Hills, still wooded, not yet constructed, and then the Z32 case is split by Millbrook Road. So you can see the south side on the left of this photo and the north side on the right. So I'll start with the text change. So this is, again, the conditions that exist today from 2019. So they are reducing the maximum number of dwelling units by 15. So there is an approved site plan for this site that has precisely 97 apartment units in it. So they are just matching that condition with what they have approved. There are a number of uses prohibited. That's conditions remaining. Condition number 3 is referencing property here. So if you approve Z32, that property will no longer be in this district, so it's inappropriate to have a zoning condition that points to something outside your district. So that's just sort of an administrative cleanup And everything else is staying the same. So there's a prohibition on, or like two conditions that together describe when and when you cannot have a 4-story building. That's number 4 and number 5 there. A condition requiring a common area, and then some tree planting, and also streetscape requirements, and a setback from Shelley Lake. Again, all this stuff was approved in 2019 as part of that case. So then the new district, if you approve, or if council approves Z32, would also have uses. This is identical to what exists today. And then number 3 is picking up that no construction south of Millbrook. So again, sort of shifting that to make sure that is maintained, but that the property south of Millbrook would still be tree preservation. And setting for this district a maximum of 25. So we have a decrease of 15 on one and 25 here, which does this horrendous table. Ultimately, if both cases were approved, would increase total entitlement by 8, is the math. If you are confused about that, I can go over it, but it is rather boring how we got there. So this part of town is fairly residential in character, so not a lot of destinations other than Shelley Lake, which I think is, for me, a lot of my bike and transit score would be Shelley Lake, but how that is calculated. There is some bus service on Millbrook Road, the 23L, which is across town, 30-minute currently headway. Technically does, most of this is fairly neutral because not much is changing here. But technically does allow more units and smaller units, et cetera. And again, most of the site is still undeveloped. There are a couple of detached houses on some of the lots. So consistent with the comprehensive plan overall and with the future land use map, but for one little staff recommendation. So Z32, if Z32 was to be approved, you can see the new lot. So again, this triangle is added today. It was not in the previous case. Designated public parks and open space. So we are recommending that be amended to be uniform with the rest of the site north of Millbrook, to be moderate scale residential, but otherwise consistent with the comp plan and relevant policies. And so it is at your discretion if you would like to approve one, recommend approval of one and denial of the other, or approval of both or denial of both, or whatever permutation. And I'd be happy to, if you want some clarity before you're ready to make motions, if that's the way the discussion goes, I'd be happy to do that. And if there are no other questions, and again, I feel like Travis can correct me, but 20 minutes or 10 and 10 or however you want to do that, as appropriate. I know the applicant is prepared to have 2 presentations on each case, if that's how you'd like to do it. But
I think I'd like to have the applicant run through both presentations.
All right. Good morning, Chair Fox, members of Planning Commission, Worth Mills. On behalf of the rezoning and text change to zoning conditions applicant, joined by Ben Williams with Priest Craven, who has been working on both the rezoning of Z4119 as well as the ASR 5020, which has already been approved for that area along North Hills Drive. This rezoning and the accompanying TCZ is requested to reallocate density from the approved Z4119 site further south into these 2 properties, which will further the opportunity to create a new point of access off of West Millbrook Road, where there is currently only access to and from North Hills Drive. So as it relates to Z3222, the property is just over 2 acres, and it's zoned a mix of R4 and that Z4119 RX3 parking limited conditional use. As I mentioned, the request is to reallocate density and permit no more than 25 units on this assemblage. And again, this shift in permitted development can provide another access point for residents onto West Millbrook Road, and the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan and the future land use map. So, as Ira mentioned, these properties are located on the western side of West Millbrook and North Hills Drive. All proposed development for this rezoning is planned on the north side of West Millbrook. The southern portion is intended to remain as that active tree preservation. So 910 West Millbrook was included in the rezoning of these properties. In that case was Z4119. That was approved by council in June of 2020 with a mix of residential mixed use 4-story and 3-story height limits. And again, in furtherance of that rezoning case, the owner, North Hills Investment Partners, submitted and had approved a site plan which concerns only those contiguous parcels. So again, the site plan only concerns that area right there. It does not concern 910 West Millbrook. But the City of Raleigh has approved ASR 5020, which permits up to 97 dwelling units out of the 112 that were permitted in Z4119. It's split amongst 2 buildings, currently applying and looking to have approved the site permitting so that grading work can begin and the construction of those 2 buildings can commence. But to date, no construction really has begun. And these are some elevations of that site plan. This is looking from North Hills Drive of that building 1, and then building 2 also looking from North Hills Drive. And then here are some renderings from the owner's website. This is intended to be called Parkview Living, and you can find those there on the developer's website as well. 3 separate future land use map designations for the properties. 910 West Millbrook is split between moderate scale residential and low scale residential. 705 West Millbrook at the corner of the intersection is designated as public parks and open space, which we really did not get much explanation on during staff review as to the cause for that future land use map designation. But again, as Ira mentioned, this rezoning would shift that designation to moderate scale density residential as well. This slide here shows a concept plan of how these 2 sites can be brought into the existing and approved ASR. So you see the 2 approved buildings along North Hills Drive, and then these 2 properties would then be more or less assimilated into that existing development. You can see where we anticipate potential tree conservation area closest to the North Hills Drive and West Millbrook Road intersection, with buildable area likely to be somewhere in this area, with a drive aisle allowing for vehicular traffic to access West Millbrook Road as well. And again, the conditions that we've offered to date, condition 1 is a similar use prohibition to what is approved in Z4119. The total number of dwelling units is not to exceed 25. So we're looking at 1 modestly sized residential building of similar architectural design to what was shown just a couple slides ago. And then again, taking that approved condition for the south portion of 910 West Millbrook, we're removing it from Z4119 and we're bringing it into Z3222, essentially stating that there will be no development south of West Millbrook Road. That area will remain as active tree preservation. And again, the case is consistent with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan overall. You want me to go ahead and jump to the text change? Got it. All right. I think this one will be fairly straightforward as well. So this text change to zoning conditions, the only thing that we are doing that would modify the zoning conditions is we are lowering the allowable units from 112 to 97, and we are removing that condition related to the southern portion of 910 West Millbrook. So the area concerned for this text change is just under 6 acres of the, give or take 7 acres that were a part of Z4119. Again, this zoning was approved in June of 2020. This is the current zoning conditions for Z4119. We are proposing to change condition 1 from 112 dwelling units to 97, and then remove condition 3 altogether. Again, a lot of this is repetitive based on the last presentation, but there you can see the changes to the proposed zoning conditions. And again, showing how this site would kind of coexist with the rezoning property. This case is also consistent with the future land use map and the 2030 comprehensive plan. I'll save my 12 minutes, and I'm sure I'll probably have some questions to answer. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to public comment. Are there any members of the public who are here to speak on Z3222? Okay. Any members of the public here to speak on TCZ 3322? Seeing none, I'll move to questions and comments from commissioners. Are there any questions or comments on either of the two cases?
I was wondering what uses are still allowed under the use conditions. It's there's no retail or eating or personal service or office. What's still allowed in the mixed use?
If I remember correctly, this case was requested and approved under the prior to this form-based density calculation. So for an R10 district, you're actually capped at 10 units per acre. And so I believe that the request to residential mixed use was twofold. It was to allow building heights up to 4 stories in certain areas of the site, and it was also to allow density greater than 10 units per acre. I don't believe this was never intended to kind of serve as a mixed use development. And was solely to kind of be a, more dense than a townhouse or single family development. But again, residential uses were the only items that were contemplated for development.
Okay. I'd love to see some gentle retail adjacent to more of our greenways, including Shelley Lake. I think it'd be great to have those amenities nearby. So I'd like to support softening of that condition, if at all possible.
I agree with you as well. I was going to ask about the prohibition for daycare.
And really, I think what we were trying to do here was just mimic as close as possible to what was approved under Z4119, just to, again, kind of show the consistency and the cohesion between those two projects or two separate requests. But again, we can take that under consideration.
Excellent, thank you. Any other questions or comments from commissioners? So I'm going to recommend that we keep these two tied together as well. It sounds like there's an offer to adjust a condition related to prohibited uses. I'm going to look at staff for just a hot minute. October 11 is unacceptable. So we're going to, without objection, we're going to defer these two cases to our October 11 meeting.
Thank you.
So moving on to case Z5122, which is back on Buffalo Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 4.5 acres from residential 4 to neighborhood mixed use 3 stories conditional use. Conditions limit certain uses and limit access points. We'll start with a staff presentation from Don Belk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning again. This request would rezone a 4.5 acre tract to the neighborhood mixed use category with conditions. As you see, the zoning in the area is predominantly residential, R4 to the north mainly, and R6 to the west and south. There is an existing commercial use at the corner of Old Mill Bernie and Buffalo Road, as well as an existing residential area zoned for manufactured home. An aerial view showing the location of the site in general. This view shows, just to illustrate the level of activity in this area over the last 3 years. Note the pending rezoning cases as well as some recently approved zoning cases in this general area. And a closer view showing the Bryson Village residential area and the existing commercial at the corner. A couple of street views, Buffalo Road at the Old Mill Bernie intersection looking north. You'll see the existing retail store there, and also a view to the south. Buffalo Road looking east, showing the Bryson Village residential development, and the opposite view toward the intersection. Just some streetscape views to the upper left. Really just illustrates the vestiges of the rural and agricultural character that's still present in the area. A view of the existing manufactured home community east of the site. There is a civic use, a church that's located adjacent to the property to the west, and a streetscape view from Bryson Village. The applicant has proposed conditions that would specify a particular list of permitted uses, as you see here. All uses that are currently permitted, all residential uses that are currently permitted in R6, with the specification of restaurant, retail sales, with some exceptions, as you see. I need to note that the lottery ticket sales prohibition may not stand scrutiny, so that is noted as an outstanding issue to modify the condition to remove that particular item. Also permitted community garden, plant nursery, produce stand, and urban farm. The applicant also specifies access points, one access point on Buffalo and Old Mill Bernie, and they have capped retail uses to a maximum of 20,000 square feet. The entitlements existing versus proposed. Note that the maximum number of units, there could be 16 additional units at this location. And again, retail is capped at 20,000 square feet. Because of the area's location, it does score low on our transportation and energy analysis. There is no transit service at the location. It is really automobile dependent, no bicycle infrastructure, and the transportation cost impact index and the job proximity index are lower than average. It will add to the housing supply, increasing that residential entitlement, and the zoning would permit a variety of housing types along with smaller units and smaller lots. The area has a higher percentage of minority populations, but slightly lower low-income population than the citywide average. Slightly higher of under age 5 population, slightly lower over age 64. In the area, the rate of increase in median gross rents is at a slower rate than the city average, and we identified no restricted covenants or historical covenants that restricted racial groups in the area. Should note that the request is inconsistent with the current, that's an error there, it's inconsistent with low-scale residential, the proposal for the neighborhood mixed-use commercial zoning. And again, it is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan, inconsistent with the flume. Number of consistent policies is noted here. The inconsistent policies relate, of course, to the flume inconsistency, also noting the inconsistency with the zoning and infrastructure impact. And this item was discussed, explained in the staff report relating to the Raleigh Fire's ability to meet standards for response times. I wanted to just mention that this is an issue that's affecting other rezoning proposals in the area. These are under review. There have been many discussions with city management and Raleigh Fire, also discussions with applicants regarding the dedication of land sufficient to build both a temporary fire station, which could be up and running within several months, and also available land for a permanent fire station, which is needed in the area. Your deadline for action, excuse me, is November 26th. There are a couple of meetings that you have in the interim. It is inconsistent with the flume, as mentioned, and this approval of this proposal would result in an amendment to the flume, changing it from low-scale residential to neighborhood mixed use. That concludes my presentation. Be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. Next, we're going to move on to the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, members of the Planning Commission. Isabel Maddox, P.O. Box 946, Raleigh 27602. I'm here today representing Logan Family Farms, LLC, and here with me today are Robert Logan and Leslie Logan, members of that family and that LLC. As Don mentioned, we're seeking a rezoning of a 4.5-acre parcel at the corner of Buffalo and Old Mill Burney to accommodate a family garden center. Unlike most of your proposals this morning, this is not really proposing a residential development here. Yes, the future land use map would say residential, but we think there's some real benefits to a little bit of a commercial here, and I'll tell you about the details of what they're planning here. Just some history on the Logans. As you probably know, the Logan family has operated Logan's Garden Center at the Seaboard area, just north of downtown, for many years. And they will continue to do that for several years. They're also looking for a relocation area. They've sold that property, but they want to relocate their main flagship store somewhere else in Raleigh. But they'd also like to have another Logan's on the eastern edge of the city. They all live on either the eastern edge of Raleigh or Knightdale, so they live in that area. They love that area and would like to put a Logan's East, if you will, in that area. And they think it's really a good area for a garden center. Their concept is that it would be a garden center much like the one in downtown Raleigh, but it'll have a cafe, coffee shop, that kind of thing. Some hardware, plants to stay in their pots, also plants to plant. So nursery, garden center, maybe even a produce stand there. It would not serve all the retail needs in this area, but as you've heard lots about, the Publix is coming not too far from here. But this would allow for, they really sort of envision it as a community gathering space where you come over in the morning, get your coffee, get your plants, go home, plant them, and you see your friends, see your neighbors. And it maybe even have sort of a general store kind of feel to it. It is designated low-density residential, but I believe it would be a welcome addition to the neighborhood. We've had 2 neighborhood meetings. One of them was with one neighbor, and the second one was only 7. But it was, I've done a lot of zoning cases and done a lot of neighbors meetings, and I think I can say this is like the best one ever because the neighbors were really excited about it, and there was a lot of good back and forth between the neighbors and the developers / family about ideas they had, and they really had a great dialogue about things they wanted to see. And Leslie Logan was, always very receptive to new ideas, and I thought there was some real good exchange between neighbors. There's no neighbor opposition has been expressed. We will protect the neighborhood because we will be a mixed-use district, and so we will have to preserve the neighborhood transition. So that will be one protection. And when we think this type of use will sort of preserve the sort of agricultural nature of the area because it will be plants, and that will be the main thing here, plus a little general store and a little coffee or lunch. And yes, the transportation score for this site was not good, but I think we'll really improve the mixed-use nature of this area so that some of all these people that are moving to this area will have a place they can go for some goods and services that they can't get very close. When the Publix comes, they can get some of this stuff, but they can't get the garden supplies. But so anyway, we think it has some real benefits in being sort of a community gathering space, provision of goods and services, while still maintaining sort of that rural feel. So therefore, we think it is reasonable and in the public interest, despite being inconsistent with the future land use map. It is, however, been determined to be consistent with the comprehensive plan overall. On the lottery ticket, the first I saw of that was in the staff report. We're certainly willing to take that out. The idea there was to take away the more, uses that some people find offensive. And also there's a little corner store across the street that's there, and they do sell lottery tickets, and I think he wanted to maintain the ability to do that exclusively. So that was not a problem for the Logans. Don't have any intention or desire to do lottery tickets. So we're willing to take that out. I would ask staff if that can be done as sort of technical change that we can do between now and council. So yeah, we'd be willing to take that out. So that's really my presentation. We feel like this would be a great use for this area, and we appreciate your support. Certainly available for questions, as are Leslie and Robert Logan. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any members of the public here to speak on this item? No? Seeing none, I'll move on to questions and comments from commissioners. If we have no questions, then I'd like to entertain a motion.
All right, for Z5122, I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated September 27th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. This recommendation also includes an amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement. This action taken is reasonable and in the public interest because the proposal would provide convenient access to a limited range of retail uses for the surrounding community.
Thank you. And do we have a second? Second. Commissioner Otwell has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z5122. Commissioner Elder has offered a second. Do we need a friendly amendment to recommend removal of the condition relating to lottery ticket sales? Okay. I'd like to make that friendly amendment if you'll accept it.
I accept it.
Thank you. So if there's no additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion, by show of hands, those in favor? And any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item F.6, which is Z5822 Alexandertown Boulevard. This is a request to rezone approximately 1.78 acres from industrial mixed-use 3 stories Parkway with airport overlay district to industrial mixed-use 3 stories with airport overlay district. This is a general use case. We will start with a staff presentation from Hannah Reckow.
Good morning. So the site, as was mentioned, is one parcel, 0 Alexandertown Boulevard, located in a large area of light industrial and industrial zoning, especially to the north and east, and then a smaller area of residential zoning directly to the west. Location, this is in northwest Raleigh, north of Umstead State Park and the interchange of Glenwood Avenue and I-440. Like with the zoning, there's a mix of commercial and light industrial uses. You can see that spans to the east and then south of 440 as well. Zoom in on the site. It has frontage just on Alexandertown Boulevard, and you can see abuts directly to the townhouse development to the west. Show a few views of the site. From Alexandertown Boulevard, you can see it's forested, mostly just forested. As was mentioned, this is a request for a general use district. And the request is really to remove the Parkway frontage. So base district height limit would remain the same. And so the overall entitlement is not really changing as much as what requirements about what would be required along the frontage. So Parkway frontage requires a essentially shod yard along the frontage, and parking and buildings must be set back 50 feet. So with removal of that, the buildings could be located closer to the street than that. The site has a lower walk, bike, and transit score than the citywide average, but a higher proximity to jobs than average. No transit within walking distance of the site. There would be no change to the housing that would be provided. The airport overlay district does not permit residential, so there would continue to be no residential permitted. Area residents, less likely to be people of color, low income, or linguistically isolated than the citywide average. And future land use map designation is office, research, and development. An IX district where housing is restricted aligns with that designation, so it is consistent with the future land use map. The site is within a large city growth center, northwest Raleigh. This designation recommends urban or hybrid frontage, but also acknowledges that site context may, other approaches may be appropriate depending on site context. The request does not have an urban or hybrid frontage. It is requesting to remove a suburban frontage. And then a couple other factors went into play here. It's a relatively small site. It's not on a urban form corridor, a designated corridor, and would generally impact the urban form of the area less so than some other larger sites. So for those reasons, the request is noted as neither consistent nor inconsistent with the urban format. But the request is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan, a handful of policies. The request would continue to permit a mix of uses in a mixed-use center, would continue to have the airport overlay district where the comprehensive plan recommends it and the airport recommends it. And there are a few inconsistent policies. IX does permit commercial and light industrial uses that could have impacts on the certain residential areas to the west. The request is not really introducing those. Those are already permitted on the site, but it's worth noting in the policy analysis. And then the future land use map designation wants to see retail as ancillary to other uses, and there would be no limit on retail per se. It could be a standalone use. And then again, noting appropriate locations, impacts of industrial areas. So that concludes the overview. No outstanding issues, and your deadline for action is in the end of November.
Thank you. Next, we're going to move on to the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you, members of the commission. My name is Todd Jones. I'm an attorney here in Raleigh, but I'm also the applicant with a partner. We are asking for a very innocuous change in the zoning. It is simply to remove that 50-foot buffer from the street so that we can have a little bit more room for parking. We intend to construct a commercial mixed-use building, attractive flex space masonry building, and that is our intention, and so we'd ask for your support in this. And if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Just want to check if there are any members of the public who are here to speak on this item. Seeing none, I'll move on to questions and comments from commissioners. And if there are no questions, then I will move right into asking for a motion.
I'll move to approve case Z5822 and to adopt the consistency statement contained in today's agenda materials.
And do we have a second? Second. Okay. Vice Chair Miller has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z5822, and Commissioner Dautel has offered a second. There's no other discussion or debate on the merits of the motion. By show of hands, those in favor and any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item F.7, which is case Z4322 on Clover Lane. This is a request to rezone approximately 5.37 acres from residential 10 with neighborhood conservation overlay district to residential mixed use 5 stories green conditional use and residential 6 with neighborhood conservation overlay district. Conditions limit certain uses and address density massing, access, screening, lighting, and provisions for a bike share station and a transit easement, among others. We'll start with a staff presentation from Hannah Recco.
Right, yep, this is case Z4322 for 405 Clover Lane. You can see this is located along Wake Forest Road at Clover Lane. Really a large residential area. Properties have the Mordecai NCOD, and then there's a few parcels along Wake Forest, north and south of the site that do have mixed-use zoning. So further situate ourselves, this is northeast of downtown. You can see Capitol Boulevard and the commercial industrial uses along there, and then a mix of residential scales in the surrounding area. The site shape you can see is on either side of Clover Lane. Currently the apartments currently on the site, frontage on Wake Forest Road, and then a small portion that connects to Watauga Street to the east. So a few images from those frontages. You can see the cul-de-sac on Clover Lane and the apartments there, and then in the bottom right-hand corner, the small, what looks like a driveway currently that connects to Watauga. So the request does have a number of conditions that apply only to the RX5 portion. I'll go through them now. They prohibit some uses normally permitted in RX, limit the number of dwelling units on the site, provide a maximum height of buildings as measured along Wake Forest Road, so it'll be 65 feet, a maximum wall plane height near the rear of the site, which would be 75 feet, and I believe 5-story height limit corresponds otherwise to 80 feet for context. If townhomes are built, they shall be no more than 3 stories and 45 feet in height. And then there's a condition limiting driveways serving multi-unit or commercial space would not connect vehicle access to Watauga Street. There's a multi-part condition specifies buffers and setbacks if a 5-story building is built. So that would be 30-foot protective yards along the north and south boundaries, 45-foot protective yard along the eastern boundary, and then a minimum of 100-foot primary building setback. It specifies similar things if a 4-story building is built, and those are 20-foot protective yards along the 3 boundaries, minimum 65-foot primary building setback. That also applies to trash and recycling. There's a condition specifying screening of structured parking, a condition specifying lighting on structured parking, a condition requiring stormwater control for 25, 50, and 100-year storm events. So again, that's in addition to the 2 and 10 that's required in the code. A condition on hours of operation for any trash and recycling facility service on the site. One noting pole-mounted lighting requirements, full cutoff, and location and maximum height of those poles. And then finally, there's a condition committing to a 10 dock and at least 6 e-bike city bike share station on the site or in the adjoining right-of-way, and then a promise for a transit easement along Wake Forest Road should Raleigh DOT request one. So overall, we have a residential district, most of that site being rezoned to residential mixed use, an increase in building height, varying with the proposed conditions based on what is built, the green frontage, and then the zoning conditions that cap maximum number of units, and also specify additional setbacks and buffers from some of the property boundaries. So you can see there's actually an increase in setbacks on the property with the proposed zoning. So the site is located in an area that is very walkable, has a higher bike and transit score than the city, and is still got good proximity to jobs as well. There are a few bus routes that serve Wake Forest Road. One has 15-minute frequent service. And the request would add to the number of units that could be built on the site. No guaranteed subsidized units, but a variety of housing types permitted. Smaller units and lots would be allowed and is within walking distance of transit. Demographic analysis, the area is slightly less racially diverse compared with the city average, but similarly likely to be low income compared to the average, and housing costs have increased similarly to the city average as well. The site is designated medium scale residential on the future land use map. So RX aligns with that designation. The height guidance is mixed. So for a core transit context, the comp plan recommends 2 to 5 stories. For an edge context that's closer to lower scale residential areas, recommends 3 stories and recommends 4 for general. So the request is for 5 stories. It does have significantly more buffering and setbacks than would be required under the UDO. So with all that considered, it is consistent with medium scale residential. The site is along transit emphasis corridor on Wake Forest Road and within a frequent transit area. The green frontage and urban frontage is consistent with that guidance. And the request is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan, including policies on compact development, capitalizing on transit access, provides buffering beyond what the code would normally require, and permits a variety of housing types, as well as goes beyond on stormwater mitigation. No inconsistent policies were identified in the analysis. There is one item I'm going to note that transit staff has some recommended changes to the last condition on the transit easement. So should there be an opportunity to transit staff would like to see a few changes to that condition made. But otherwise, that concludes the overview, and your deadline for action is at the end of November. Can answer any questions you have.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Hey, good morning. Toby Coleman, here on behalf of the applicant Clover Lane LLC. My address is 150 Fayetteville Street. Good morning to you all. May I say, just to start out, I'm impressed with y'all's speed this morning. I was roughly estimating that we might get heard by maybe the 11 o'clock hour, so I credit Travis for all of it. Anyway, this is Hannah did a great job giving you the outline. Just to give you sort of the overlay map, this is a bit of a unicorn site. It is an apartment building. It's an existing apartment development in the middle of Mordecai. And so a little bit of a unicorn site. It's about 5.3 acres. If you abandon Clover Lane, I think it's closer to 5.7 acres, which Clover Lane is a dead-end cul-de-sac there. And so you've got a little bit of a unique site. It's got 57 units currently on it. There's some interesting background here. So the apartments were built in 1968. And you can see it if you've been out there, you can sort of see that they're these old school townhome style apartments. They predate the NCOD designation by 30 years. I can't say why. If you look at the NCOD, I don't know why this was included, except that it was sort of just along the path of travel. Interesting thing to note about the NCOD is that what the Mordecai NCOD does is it has minimum and maximum lot size limits. The maximum lot size is about 1/3 of an acre. It's 14,520 square feet. For a number of years, and I haven't gone back and looked at specifically at Article 10, but I know at least with the new UDO, up until the missing middle text change, the minimum lot size for apartments was 15,000 square feet. So effectively, this NCOD, when it was enacted, made this not only non-conforming because the lot was too big, but had an effect of making apartments illegal in Mordecai. And so part of this rezoning is to remove the NCOD. Frankly, in order to redevelop this site, if it burned down and you wanted to redevelop it today, you'd have to probably remove the NCOD or do something pretty funky. Get some very special variances. The reason we're seeking the rezoning is there's a need for redevelopment here. This is an owner requested rezoning, so there is not a specific plan in place, but the owners do recognize the need for the property to be upgraded. It's about 50 years old, 55 years old by my count. And you couldn't do the existing development as it stands today. So we've proposed a rezoning that would increase the density. The proposal is 329 units max, and we would achieve that with height. So we've been meeting with neighbors for a number of months. We had 4 different neighborhood meetings. We've been meeting with small groups. We've obviously got some very concerned neighbors here, and they've actually been fantastic in that the CAC reached out to me, Deborah Deaton, who's here, who's holding up the Keep Our NCOD sign, called me, I think the day our first pre-application meeting notice went out and said, we want to start talking. And so we've been talking with them for a while. And one of the good things we heard is that they were open to an increased multifamily on the site. They recognized this was sort of a unique site, but they had concerns about height, buffers. They wanted to protect Watauga Street, which is the street on your right there, and they wanted us to cap density. And so we've tried to address all of those concerns. One of the things we heard from the initial meeting with neighbors was give us a massing plan. We know you guys don't have a specific plan, but it's hard for us, and I'm sure you guys hear this all the time, and actually I know you do, it's hard for us to imagine what you're talking about without some sort of massing plan, what could be built under your proposed rezoning. So we worked with Klein Design. David Brown with Klein Design is here. to sort of come up with a concept. And so this is again, a concept plan. I sort of put the purple over the building envelope to give you, just to make sure that it's clear this is a concept plan. But what this shows is where a 4 or 5 story building could be located. And, our proposal is, to have 100-foot setbacks if you've got a 5-story building on the property, 75-foot building setbacks if it's 4 stories, with protective yards greater than what's required under the UDO transition areas. So 30 feet on the north and south if it's 5 stories, 45 feet on the east if it's 5 stories, and then 20 feet all around if it's 4 stories. And here's the massing to give you a sense. I mean, basically what the goal here was, and what one of the lessons learned was, is that you could provide greater sort of on-site transition through buffering with the neighborhood by basically by going taller in this sort of building envelope. Klein did some initial studies that looked at, the existing site has buildings as close as, I want to say 5 feet, and that's probably an overestimate to the property line. So currently there's buildings that are very pushed up against the property line. And if you did a 3-story surface park structure, you would end up with something that was much closer to the property line. So one of the ideas here is if you did a taller building, you could create larger space, larger buffers, and provide that sort of transition area on the site, as you can see. One of the things we heard from neighbors was they were very concerned about the height and the context within this property. As Hannah noted, the maximum height for a 5-story product under the UDO is 80 feet. We've proposed a height limit of 65 feet, which we've done, by working hard to sort of say, what can we do? How low can we get? And wanting to be very sensitive to the neighborhood concerns there. Here's just a couple of studies we've shown the neighbors. So, on the left there, sort of a visual impact study. This is, sort of showing you if you had a closer 3-story building, it'd have more visual impact than a 4 or 5-story building with a large setback. On the right, we were asked to do shade studies. And I apologize, the nature of PowerPoint, I can't give you giant versions of this, but on the top is 3 stories with, a 20-foot setback. On the bottom is 4 to 5 stories with a 100-foot setback. And as you can see, one of the benefits of that larger setback is you reduce the shade impacts on those neighbors to the north, which was one concern we heard. Another concern that you're probably going to hear from neighbors, and we've heard, is that this site does have a lot of topography on it. There's about a 20-foot drop from Wake Forest Road down to the back of the site. So we've added an additional limitation of a 75-foot max rear wall height. We did that to try to come up with a way to address that issue that's sort of similar to what you see in the infill rules, and basically it helps ensure that this thing doesn't end up at 65 feet plus 20 feet on the back end. One of the limitations there, we really pushed hard on that. One of the limitations there is if you get structured parking in, you got to put it in the back. It's a tuck under concept. So we're going to end up with that as part of the back wall. And so that's really where a lot of the 75 foot is driven from. We've tried to be very responsive to the concern on access to Watauga. That's that area highlighted in red, that little nub. We heard a lot of concern from neighbors about they didn't want additional development pushing onto their neighborhood street. Watauga doesn't have sidewalks, and we heard from neighbors that they would like to preserve it as is. And so we came up with a solution. We proposed, okay, let's limit driveway access for apartment uses to emergency and utility access. That provides some fire safety access with a locked gate, but doesn't create a lot of traffic. We've heard a little bit from transportation that they would like us to preserve that, but we've actually done a lot of work. We've worked with Kimley Horn, Tyler Farrell's here, and actually talked to the city and NCDOT to make sure that even with one driveway on Wake Forest, which is the likely outcome for development here, that this could be done with a restricted access. Finally, 2 things. On surface parking, we did hear a desire to limit surface parking on the site. At this point, we're trying to balance 2 concerns. One from neighbors saying, we don't want a development to push parking out onto our neighborhood streets because many of us don't have driveways, and others that said we want you not to have surface parking. We heard the reasons were stormwater, lighting, things like that. So we tried to address those issues rather than completely eliminating surface parking. And I'll just note, we did do a level of service sort of summary of traffic study that shows that there's not a significant increase in traffic impacts on surrounding intersections. And with that, I will cede my 2 seconds.
Well done on timing. I'm going to imagine that there are likely members of the public who would like to speak on this item. We're going to have a total of 10 minutes for members of the public to speak. I don't know if you've designated a speaker or if you would like to get in line at this point and split the time. Excellent.
We'll both be splitting the time. Let me get this down. Good morning. I'm Catherine Clodfelter, 500 Frank Street. Would everyone here opposing the application as filed please stand? I'm here to ask you, on my behalf and the behalf of these folks and the people who wrote you Friday, to do one of two things. Please either send this to be heard by the Infrastructure and Mobility Committee or deny the application as filed. There are two problems. It's inconsistent with the plan as the conditions are currently written, and that harms us as neighbors, and we want that addressed now and not later. And the second, it will decrease walkability and pedestrian safety in our neighborhood, both on Wake Forest and on Watauga. It does not address our concerns, including our home values. There's no plan for the affordability issues. It doesn't necessarily increase housing stock, but what it does guarantee is that the folks who live there in the 56 units are going to be displaced. Y'all can sit, thanks. You know this sits in the NCOD. I'm not going to harp on that because I understand that's not a popular concept these days and that there are comprehensive plan things that we want to talk about. But I would like to know that the NCOD still stands, and so your job is to understand where the policies are consistent with NCOD and where they are not. This entire thing is inconsistent with NCOD. I'm going to put that aside. Let's talk about the comprehensive plan, because that's what we're really here to talk about today. There are two sections of the comprehensive plans that have been mentioned that I think we need to focus on. The first has to do with density and the number of cars that could be on that spot. This is a medium-scale residential district, which you have heard. It does not allow 5 stories. Medium-scale residential district is defined in the future land use map and the comprehensive plan to state in an area where there are older neighborhoods with a mix of single-family homes and multi-homes, RX zoning with 3 or 4 story height is appropriate. That's not just about height, that's density to us. RX5 is not consistent with a comprehensive plan. That's also written on page 41 and 42 of the comprehensive plan. You heard that conflict between edge and transit districts would be general. That's 4 stories max. Again, that's a density concern. There are solutions to all of these things, but they need to be written out now. The problem with height is that you have as filed the highest part of the building, 75 feet, as you heard Mr. Coleman say, up against single-family home bungalows. So that goes against the comprehensive plan. Again, that is higher than the comprehensive plan should allow for this area. Let's talk about connectivity, though, because I imagine that's something that y'all are focused on, and it has to do with pedestrian access. So condition 6 is a request from the neighborhood to limit motor vehicle access onto Watauga. We would love to open it up for pedestrians and for bike uses. We understand that, and we find that to be a safety issue. We cannot handle 600 cars on Watauga. We have no sidewalks. That is where we walk. That's where our kids walk to Emma Khan, and we need it to stay safe. As currently drafted, that condition is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan because it doesn't allow connectivity and a pedestrian access. We've proposed that as neighbors because we think that's necessary to comply with the city code, and if you don't have it, what we're afraid is that this gets down the line and we're told, sorry, connectivity is a problem, open the whole thing up. And then we lose our walkable streets, our kids have to deal with 600 more cars on the road, and you all are passing an inconsistent application. There's another red flag about this that I think y'all should be concerned about. The condition as filed says on multifamily apartments. So townhomes aren't covered. They could be the exact same density. Single-family homes aren't covered under this. We have asked numerous times that single-family homes be covered under the same condition, meaning if single-family homes are built on the property, that access drive to Watauga is also restricted for motor vehicles. Pedestrians and bikes, please bring them all. If you keep a condition for the sole reason that you might want to build single-family homes, that sends a red flag to me, and it should send a red flag to you. It's either a negotiation tactic against the neighborhood for something they really feel they need, or it's because single-family homes are marketable on this property, and indeed that's what the applicant, or whoever the applicant sells it to, plans to do. That means that it would be inconsistent with city policy to rezone this property without a plan that requires higher density, or that it at least addresses some of these concerns. I want to say I think we've been misheard and misunderstood when it comes to the height issue. These are height issues about density and the cars that are going to follow. And that's not just on Watauga, that's also about Wake Forest. Our kids from the east side of Mordecai walk to Emma Khan behind the property. That's the only thing to get to. There is no reason to have motor vehicle access otherwise. We do encourage the kids to walk to school. I want to briefly go through the conditions as filed. You have 15 conditions before you, and I understand that seems like a lot. What I want to try and tell you is most of them don't make sense, and there really should be about 7 in general. I'll start with condition 2. The number of units that's being proposed is 4, so basically they've given us a condition that's already should be required, but a RX 5 is not appropriate. Maximum height is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan on condition 3 at 75 feet against bungalow homes. Condition 4, this is the same condition as 3. It actually would put the same building, the same mass, density and height, 35 feet closer to homes. That doesn't make any sense to us. We're not sure why that's a condition. Condition 5, we were told 5 stories were preferable to 3 stories because of the shade impact on our homes, and now you have a condition that allows for shade impact on the north side. Condition 6, this is the condition we're asking go to Infrastructure and Mobility Committee. Condition 8 proposes a building with the same mass. Again, condition 9, this also needs to contain a maximum number of surface parking units. We also want to increase walkability. We also are fine with density, but there needs to be a limit on surface parking. And if the owner wants more dense units, they need to give up surface parking space instead of trying to get height that's incompatible with the comprehensive plan. Condition 11, I have to laugh a little bit. I'm not actually sure you can demand when your trash gets picked up. If so, I would like to know. But that's not a condition that I think can even be drafted. Condition 12 was required by the city. And condition 11 might have actually been the stormwater one, so I think I'm talking maybe about the trash one. Anyway, what I hope I've shown you is that 15 are really 7. What's left out is any way to preserve the housing that is currently there, and I'm going to leave that to Sarah Mers. Thank you.
Hey there, Sarah Mers, 508 Frank Street. I live a block and a half from Wake Forest Road and half a block from Clover Lane. I want to talk about insufficient infrastructure and also housing. So my property and the house next door to me, 510 Frank, have a severe stormwater issue. That basement floods at 4 feet, and that has been true through many, many neighbors. I've heard has been an issue many years before I lived there. I lost my lawnmower to a foot of water in my garage 2 years ago, and the city has put this on the stormwater improvement list. We're number 26. It may take 7 years, and that presumes that nothing is ranked prior to ours. The water actually backs up from the city system at the foot of a couple of streets where 3 pipes converge. It backs up all the way onto our property where we have 2 open, basically, rivers. They are the stormwater pipe opens on our property, it's dirt and stone down there. It's eroding. City staff has affirmed that is going to collapse. It's just a matter of when. I just learned we've got a neighbor at 1200 something Watauga. They have a sinkhole in their backyard. Staff have affirmed that that's from a broken stormwater pipe. They are now number 36 on that list. It may take 10 years. They're ranked pretty low, frankly. I think other projects are going to come in between. And what this means is the 4 properties between our 3 properties are probably also at risk. This is about property value. It's also about the safety of our homes. That sinkhole, those neighbors might lose their foundation. It might take a few years. We believe that the stormwater condition should state the owner will fix these so that there is sufficient infrastructure prior to the beginning of construction. Secondly, I want to address housing stock. Catherine noted this may decrease the number of units of housing. I want to be really clear on that. This does not align. We don't know that this is going to align with city policy and intention. We're worried about our neighbors at Clover Lane and where they're going to go. At the second public hearing, 4 of them came and said, we do not know where we can afford to live that's going to give us bus access to our jobs. What we have heard is that as recently as this spring, rent there was $1,395. It was increased to $1,695. It is now going at $1,900. If that's true, there's a possibility, there's the unintended consequence of people being encouraged to increase their rents artificially prior to rezoning. I'm concerned about this. I hope you'll refer it to committee. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that concludes our time, but it looks like we do have another speaker. Without objection, I'll allow 2 minutes on the clock.
Hi, I'm Ralph Flannery. I live at 503 Frank with my wife. Her dad bought the property we lived on with a new house on it in 1926. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the neighborhood. You've heard a lot of facts and things we're concerned about. It's a very progressive and forward-thinking neighborhood. I'm surrounded by professors and lawyers and doctors around us retired folks. But we are not opposed to development in Raleigh. In fact, we're very proud of the way Raleigh is growing and responding to the needs for housing and density. We just feel very much like putting what the current owners of Clover Lane are proposing on that property is totally inappropriate. It'll cast a shadow on the Mordecai Historic Park and on our 100-plus-year-old bungalows. We like to be in a progressive city. We're proud of being here. There's a right way to do it, and there's a not-so-right way to do it. The current owners bought this property knowing how it was zoned. They are now trying to push through a zoning change that will allow them to enhance their profits, I believe. And I think there are plenty of places in Raleigh that we could do this right. I would like to see us move forward with density in a do-no-harm manner, if we can, as much as possible. This will certainly do lots of harm to a charming old neighborhood in the Mordecai area. But we're not opposed to change. We like new people. We like to see Raleigh grow. So thank you for my 2 minutes, and thank you for your help.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to move on to questions and comments. I don't normally get applause, but thank you. Thank you. Moving on to questions and comments from commissioners. I'm going to start off with a question to the applicant of the nature of the access onto Watauga. Is the applicant available? There we go.
Sorry for the delay there.
No worries.
When you say the nature of the access to Watauga, are you talking about the existing or future?
Existing and then also future. I notice it was articulated in conditions that would in fact only be for utility or emergency access.
That's right. So the existing, as you can see, there is an existing, actually a curbed private drive on that sort of what I'll call a nub of the property out to Watauga. There's some interesting conditions there, I guess is the best way to say it. There's 2 adjoining properties here that actually have driveway access onto that nub. There is, I believe, a fence there, a wooden fence that blocks drive-through. So at some point, I haven't dug this far into the history. I believe that at some point there was full access, and at some point they just sort of cut it off. So there is not currently full access. There's that road, which is primarily used by the 2 adjoining neighbors. The proposal envisions that it would be limited to utility and emergency access with a locked gate, is what the zoning conditions provide. So it would preserve, and I don't know if it would need to be improved or whatever, but whatever transportation requires in terms of the actual roadway would be preserved in some shape or form. It would need to be preserved, frankly, and we're in discussion with the neighbors about trying to figure that issue out. But it would, to the RX zoned area, it would be a locked gate, so you couldn't have cars driving through there.
So would that be a locked gate for any permutation of the type of development that would be on site?
The current conditions provide that that is only required if you had multifamily. So it doesn't address townhomes. I would submit that, given that that the way that the UDO reads and the requirement that single family and attached homes be fronting a public road, I don't think that there is a way. I don't think that limiting driveway access for single family homes would have any effect in this case.
Could I clarify that point? Under the existing zoning, is there any legal restriction on having ingress and egress on Watauga?
Zero. So there's none. And in fact, what the city policy says currently, I think the neighbors have gotten an undesired crash course in our block perimeter rules in the UDO, which I find to be sort of esoteric. I don't know what you guys think of it, but this block is currently a little bit oversized for the zoning, and I don't know. Basically, and I think it's right on the edge, and it would depend a lot on the zoning. So I don't want to make general statements, but basically there would be, I think staff might want to see either a road or a pedestrian access in any sort of developed condition. And so that's why we haven't specifically provided for a pedestrian access within the zoning conditions, because I think it's going to be required under the UDO. I frankly talked with Hannah in advance of this meeting, actually, while we're at this meeting, and I'm trying to basically figure out, and I think we need to talk with transportation about what our options are. Transportation has been very concerned about the fact that we were restricting driveway access on this site. Their initial response when you get a sort of a staff response after you submit the rezoning, and their initial response was, you guys should think really hard about this, because this may create a problem. You guys may end up back in front of y'all with the zoning text change because you can't develop this site. And so what we actually did was, we knew that this was really important to the neighbors. So we actually went to, as I mentioned, to NCDOT and to the city and determined that we could offer this restricted access without impacting the developability of apartments, to make sure that could be done. But it is a little bit of an unusual condition, and it's really out of wanting to address neighbor concerns. It is not currently restricted, and frankly, it would, it's not currently restricted. I'll leave it there.
Additional questions? Go ahead.
Hi, I just want to, while we're on this topic, is the condition as written, does it prohibit? It does not prohibit pedestrian or bike access. It only speaks to prohibiting vehicular access.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. It speaks to general vehicular access. What I would submit, I believe is, and I think this is in the staff report, that if we come in with, if somebody comes in with an apartment project at site plan, they're going to have to show how they comply with the maximum block perimeter standards. And so you're probably going to either have to build a road, and if you built an apartment, we would submit you wouldn't want to build a road. And so your option there under the city code it would be to build a pedestrian access way.
I guess maybe can we just have some confirmation from transportation staff that that's the case?
Good morning. Ann Conlon, Transportation. So it is correct that as part of the review of the site, we would look at their compliance with block perimeter. There are ways to go and request relief from block perimeter, and I don't think, and David, please correct me if I misspeak, I don't think that there's any reason they cannot commit to a pedestrian connection in a condition, because then we would be certain of that connection happening, versus block perimeter, there's still the ability to go and request an exception.
Thank you for that clarification. Are there any additional questions?
Yes. To follow up from my previous question, looking at the existing zoning, if this rezoning case were to not go through, based on the fact that it's an R10 development, is it correct, looking at the staff report, that this, under the existing rezoning, could be redeveloped to be 150 apartments that with access on Watauga, that could ingress and egress with road access on Watauga?
I'm not sure I can speak to the access. I think the estimate was looking at the NCOD does not speak to building type, it speaks to minimum, maximum lot size. So assuming that a future development could meet those requirements, essentially break up the site into a bunch of different parcels and build apartments on each of those, meeting UDO requirements. Yes, that estimate is taking the NCOD and other requirements into account.
So under the slide that said under the existing zoning, the maximum units today is 150, and under R10, those could be apartments.
Correct.
And there is no restriction today on opening up the road to Watauga for those. So in effect, this rezoning case, while increasing density, it would both increase density, but it would also provide a new protection for road traffic to Watauga that doesn't currently exist. Is that accurate to say?
Yes, I believe so.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Raines.
Chair Fox, this is to the transit staff, and this may be one of their comments that they wanted to change in the condition, but under access management, they recommended more direct Wake Forest access points. And I saw on the diagram from the applicant that there was emergency access and then actual access for the occupants. So I just wanted to hear from the transit on what their recommendations for that Wake Forest access plan should be.
I'm sorry, can you clarify the question? Are you asking about transit or driveway access?
Under the staff report, there was access management comment from transit staff that's recommended more access points from Wake Forest than currently provided as part of the application.
Okay, I know, again, sorry, from transit staff you're talking about? Can we put on screen the condition? I mean, I know with regard to transit, the transit stop, we're looking at relocating the stop.
No, specifically for access to the site.
Oh,
Okay, it's on page 15 of the staff report, access to the subject property via Wake Forest, subject to driveway spacing standards, must approve driveways,
Okay, I'm sorry, Hannah just showed me the point. Sorry for, confusion. Yeah, I mean, the implication of restricting access to Watauga is that all vehicular access is to Wake Forest Road. And I think the intention of that review is to point out why that is inconsistent with our comprehensive plan, because it leads to more conflicts with pedestrians and bicyclists traveling on that road. The exact number of access points is something that gets worked out at site plan.
Okay, so that's referring to pedestrian and bikes, not vehicular specifically?
Well, it's the impact of all vehicular access happening on that corridor, which affects people walking and biking on that corridor, is kind of, we try to limit access points because they create conflicts on major corridors where you have more people walking and biking.
Okay.
Commissioner Elder, did you have a question?
Someone, I guess on that same topic, there was a mention that transportation staff would like to see a change in the wording of the condition regarding transit easement. Can you clarify that?
Yeah, I think Hannah is a little more up to speed on that than I am.
Yeah, there were some changes to the language. I believe it was the last sentence of that condition, and the word maximum when referring to the size of the easement, since the size that's reflected there would be a minimum size of easements in the city.
Go ahead, Commissioner Bennett.
My question is for the applicant. I'm concerned about the removal of the naturally occurring affordable housing, given that this is along a transit emphasis corridor. Was there any consideration given to having some affordable units in what is put back?
We have not proposed that. We do appreciate that. I did, because of, so as the staff report noted, this is listed as being naturally occurring affordable in the, I think in the 2021 Triangle J Council of Governments survey. I actually took a deep dive into that because as I believe Sarah Mers mentioned, one of the neighbors, the rents here are frankly fairly, the rents have nothing to do with the rezoning, but they are fairly high. I asked my client for a rent roll. So currently, they're going through a remodeling process, and they're all 2 bedrooms, townhomes, apartments. The fully remodeled are $1,900 a month, and the only way that's affordable for 80% AMI is if you make something like, I think, because Raleigh has median income is so high that it's like, if you have a family of 3 making like $76,000, then, and that's technically 80%, but it's not affordable to anybody else. The non-renovated, there's a plan to renovate all of them, to bring them all up to the same level of renovation. The ones that have not been fully renovated go for between $1,500 and $1,750. And again, that's generally only affordable to families making about, because if you go by basically rent needs to be 30% of monthly income, monthly pre-tax income. If you go by that, basically you're looking at, this is, to the extent this is naturally occurring affordable housing, it's naturally occurring affordable housing for people making $70,000 or more. And so given that context, what we're looking at here is the opportunity to increase the both the number of units as well as the diversity in housing unit types. So we expect that if it's redeveloped, that the site would have a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units, and which would provide something that's frankly needed in this area, and provide some opportunities in that regard.
Okay. Can I have the request to remove the NCOD is to allow for those unit types? Would the NCOD not permit those now if the site is redeveloped?
The NCOD, yeah, I mean, the NCOD would not permit the site to be developed as a single site. So you couldn't redevelop this site. You would have to, if you put in a site plan that was not subdivided, you would be non-compliant. And I I haven't gone through the rigmarole of figuring out what, I presume you could probably tear down one thing and replace it. Travis or Bynum may have, or David may have some thoughts on that, but you couldn't just replace it with apartments here. You would have to subdivide it because of the NCOD regulations.
Thank you. Go ahead, Commissioner Otwell.
I had a question for planning and a question for transportation, if I could. When the site plan comes in, if we get a big enough traffic increase, will we be required to widen or dedicate turn lanes along Wake Forest Road and potentially alter the road diet that just went in there?
So depending what proposal comes to site plan, we would evaluate the estimated number of trips, and if it triggered a traffic impact analysis, that could result in turn lane recommendations. So I can't say for certain. That's one possible outcome.
Okay, thank you. And do you know if there's any kind of condition that can happen at this stage that might prevent against that? Maybe a trip generation condition or something would be the only thing that this commission would be able to recommend to avoid that
to prevent turn lanes?
Yeah, I like the road diet the way it is, and I think turn lanes would be a detriment to the bicycle infrastructure there.
I can't imagine that we could have a condition prohibiting turn lanes because it's a state-maintained roadway. I could investigate that further.
Okay,
like.
thank you. Maybe I can give you a call later. Thanks.
I'm thinking maybe you might be looking at AM peak and PM peak caps that would
Like a
keep
trip
you
generation cap.
yeah, keep you under that threshold. I understand it.
And I did have a follow-up question. If this does get redeveloped and for whatever crazy reason we end up subdividing and putting in single-family homes, would that trigger a site 3, a type 3, a tier 3 site plan? What kind of streetscape upgrades would be required if we downgraded the density or put something back in place?
If it were subdivided and went through the subdivision process, the street designation would dictate the right-of-way and the improvements. And it would have to meet the current section.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Commissioner Elder.
Sorry, I keep bouncing back, but I'm trying to keep my questions relevant to the person at the podium here. I guess I have stormwater, maybe just clarifications. As I understand it, currently the site would have to meet pre-post for 2-year and 10-year. And the applicant is proposing that they meet it for, in addition, 25, 50, and 100, which are protections not currently offered if the site were to be developed under current zoning. And I think there was a provision of how much difference in stormwater could be. I'll also just say on the record that some of the emails about this current stormwater conditions existing already are pretty alarming as far as the city of Raleigh's ability to cope with some of the issues that residents are seeing just from a safety standpoint. So starting there, I guess my question is, would this rezoning, the conditions offered, provide enhanced protection from the current entitlement?
So the site would have to comply with the UDO 9.2.2, the conditions for peak discharge and nutrients. Because there is downstream structural flooding, they would, and I don't have a map available seeing if this is less or more than 5% of the contributing area to the downstream flooding. But if it is, then they would have to meet peak discharge for those additional storms anyway. But so if that's a zoning condition, then that takes that ambiguity away. That would maintain existing conditions for the downstream properties. It would not improve conditions, but the intent is that it would not worsen conditions. Does that address your question?
It does, and I'll go maybe just a little bit step further, is that I think, I'm sorry. Okay, just another thing, I don't remember the exact situation of a case that we had, in the last year or so, is that we had stormwater conditions that were essentially unenforceable, and I'm assuming that 0.04 in the condition refers to debt. I guess I'm questioning whether or not that's enforceable.
Yeah, Hannah, can you help me pull up the condition? Yeah, so this reflects our conditions that are already in the UDO, and so that would be enforceable. The way it is enforced depends on the conditions at the downstream location. But basically, if it's a stream channel, we're looking for how much would the water rise in that stream channel. And that would also be the case if it was a pipe system and water was coming up out of the inlets. We would look for the rise in the water ponding.
Thank you.
So I'm just, if that were the case, if we found that to be the case after the fact, who is on the hook for the improvements is that then the city that makes the improvements to lessen the impact if we find that they are greater than written here?
So the way our compliance works is that we, during the plan review process, we have them present models and we judge the compliance based on those models. We do not, for any of our regulations, require measurements of flow or depth after construction is complete.
Okay. Thank you. And I just have one more note, not necessarily a question. I find the trash collection times condition relatively difficult to enforce if there's anything, if it's public trash pickup. So. City of Raleigh trash pickup, I mean.
I don't know if that's a question that staff can answer with multifamily developments, how trash pickup is completed.
It's contracted out, so it's not city service.
Okay, thank you. I know those are conditions we used to see many times of yore. It's a throwback. I'm not going to ignore there was a conversation in both emails and then up at the podium recommending moving this to infrastructure and mobility, which I'm not opposed to doing that. The next infrastructure and mobility meeting is October 27, and I do not believe there's anything on the agenda currently. That's right. Designate a vice. Okay. All right. So it does sound like there is a little bit of work that needs to be done to edit a condition. The transit easement condition, staff has recommended edits to also further clarifying access on Watauga, addressing pedestrian connection more overtly. And then I will acknowledge there is a desire to discuss perhaps affordability and how we address the nature of the tenants currently on site. Without objection, I'm going to recommend deferral of this case to our October 27 infrastructure and mobility. Do you have an objection?
I have one other comment question.
Oh, go ahead,
Sorry.
please. Go ahead.
Thanks. For the applicant, I would ask to consider, based on the entitlement request, to prohibit use of EFS or vinyl for exterior materials.
And I had one additional comment too, since I won't be in that committee. I heard a number of the concerns from the residents about the density and the access on Watauga, and so the clarifying from staff that was helpful under the existing under the existing zoning, these 56 units could be redeveloped potentially into 150 units. Those units could be apartments, and that they could have access on Watauga today. So this rezoning case would create a new protection for Watauga Street, in which case the existing concern about density is the key one that remains. The applicant put forth a number of pictures about the shadow studies, and I was wondering if staff had a chance to review those, that shadow study in any of those exhibits.
I have not seen them before today.
Okay, thank you. If those are accurate, then generally because this creates the new protection for Watauga Street, and this is an area where we need additional density, I understand the concerns from the neighbors, but I am generally in favor of this case with those additional changes that need to be made.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett?
I just wanted to note that currently infrastructure and mobility only has about 50 minutes to meet because we back up to committee of the whole. So could we investigate maybe pushing it back to 2 if that works, or maybe another?
Absolutely.
date?
Staff
Okay.
will work with the chairperson on that.
Thanks.
All right, with that, we're going to defer this case to the October 27 Infrastructure and Mobility meeting. Moving on to the last item that is listed on new business. This is case Z1022 on Ratchford Drive. This is a request to rezone approximately 5.94 acres from industrial mixed-use 3 stories with special highway overlay district 2 to commercial mixed-use 20 stories conditional use. Conditions limit certain uses, address site layout, pedestrian connections, and put a cap on peak hour trips. We'll start off with a staff presentation from John Anagnost.
All right, good morning. Z-10-22 is at the southwest corner of Capitol Boulevard and I-440, and actually fronts on Ratchford Drive, which runs parallel to the I-440 ramp there. And so you can see that a little better here. The existing use of the site is a car dealership, as well as the property to the south, also a car dealership. And so the Capitol Boulevard corridor, as I'm sure you're aware in this area, is largely industrial, but there is some transition occurring along Capitol and Atlantic Avenue in this area. Another thing I'll note is that the Crabtree Creek Greenway Trail passes this site. Historically had passed along the rear of the site, along the creek itself. That structure has washed out a couple of times. The Parks, Recreation, and Cultural Resources Department has decided not to continue reconstructing that structure and has instead chosen to have an on-road facility here. So that is a striped bicycle path that is present on the west side of Ratchford Drive and passes along the entire frontage of this site. You can see it here. So it does have a little separation from the vehicle lanes. There is not very much vehicle traffic on the street, being a dead end and only having 2 uses on it. And this is pre-improvement for the bicycle lane. You can see after with the bicycle lane. And so that's the current alignment of the Greenway Trail. So it passes along the Ratchford Drive frontage, then passes into the multifamily development to the north, and then returns back to along the creek. Another thing I'll note about this site is there is some floodplain present along Crabtree Creek. This is the revised floodplain map that has been recently adopted. So prior to that new map being developed, there was flood hazard zones present on the intersection of Ratchford Drive and Capitol Boulevard. The revision to those maps indicate that that is a lower flood risk than it had been previously. And so the intersection itself of Ratchford Drive and Capitol Boulevard is not within the 100-year floodplain or the floodway. There's a portion of Capitol Boulevard just south of there that is in the floodway. There is information in the staff report about stream gauge data that's provided by Stormwater Division that it does not appear that water has overtopped Capitol Boulevard at that location, at least in the past 15 years or so. The requested zoning is commercial mixed use with a 20-story maximum height. No frontage is included in the requested zoning. This area does have, is within a city growth center, so that would suggest a frontage, but there are conditions here that talk a lot about how the new development should approach Ratchford Drive. And those conditions in combination produce something similar to a parking limited frontage. And so that's why you see the urban form consistency evaluation is consistent. There is effectively a build to being provided by condition number 4, and then restrictions on the way that parking can be placed near Ratchford Drive. Additionally, a bike share station is offered, and then there are limitations on the total amount, on the amount of commercial development that can be developed unless it is part of the existing structure, the existing car dealership building, or if it is part of a mixed-use multi-story building. And so basically what that's attempting to do is increase the consistency with the future land use map designation of higher scale residential, which indicates that development should be primarily residential and that only ancillary retail or commercial uses should be present within new development. And so with the commercial mixed use proposed zoning, that would allow standalone development on a site this size could encompass a fairly decent sized single story shopping center. So that condition is not enough to produce consistency with the future land use map, but does improve it. And so with the conditions improving consistency with future land use map in urban form, it does reach overall consistency with the comprehensive plan. As you can see, the increase in height here is going to allow a significant amount of additional development, including office space or residential space, which could be significant traffic generators. The trip budget condition does probably restrict the numbers you're seeing in this table to less than what is shown here. We have not done analysis to figure out exactly what those numbers would be, but you can see that in the condition it's a little over 400 trips in the AM or PM peak hour. So this area does have a good bike score and transit score. You can get to the Route 1 Capitol Boulevard bus route on Capitol Boulevard. And then in the future, there's potential for bus rapid transit to also be present in this area. The walk score is low. You do have the Crabtree Creek Greenway Trail in this location. I will note the access to the bus stop is not ideal because of the bridge over Crabtree Creek. That's, basically sidewalks on that bridge don't have a lot of buffering from the vehicle lanes, but does have access to the transit. This would increase housing supply significantly and would allow housing that could be on the first floor. The existing zoning of industrial mixed use does not allow housing on the first floor. This area is potentially more economically disadvantaged than Raleigh in general, so may benefit from additional housing. The land use history here is only known to be a car dealership constructed in the 1970s. And then inconsistent with the future land use map, so this would trigger an amendment to community mixed use, consistent with the future the urban form map due to the conditions offered. And so that produces overall consistency. There is an inconsistent policy related to the extension of Ratchford Drive here. So Ratchford Drive is proposed to be extended between Capitol Boulevard and Atlantic Avenue. And so that absolutely will require the applicant to dedicate right-of-way within their property for the future construction of that street. The UDO requirements are not known at this time whether a site plan would actually require the applicant to construct Ratchford Drive in that location. So there is potential this site could be developed with some amount of the capacity that it would be entitled by this rezoning without constructing Ratchford Drive to connect over to Atlantic Avenue. So it would only have that single access point onto Capitol Boulevard for the foreseeable future if that occurred. And there's no outstanding issues, and I can take your questions.
Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from the applicant team. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Michael Birch with Longleaf Law Partners here on behalf of the property owner and applicant. And I'm just going to keep it on this slide here for a while. So good morning. Thank you, John, for the staff report. So the purpose of this rezoning is to facilitate redevelopment of this long-time used car lot for a residential or mixed-use development that takes advantage of the site's adjacency to the Greenway, its proximity to transit, its access to the Beltline, and its location between downtown, midtown,
Of course, everything that's going on at Ironworks just to the west of here. Also facilitate redevelopment of a site that is at one of the key city gateway, entry locations into the city center. I do want to note, just from a kind of proximity and access to transit standpoint, it was mentioned that the bridge currently does not have pedestrian facilities on it, but that bridge is an active NCDOT project to replace that bridge, and it's expected that there will be pedestrian and likely bike accommodations on the new bridge. It won't increase vehicle capacity, but in terms of providing pedestrian and bike accommodations, it's anticipated that it will. So that will provide kind of that pedestrian access down to Hodges, where there are bus stops with 15-minute headways between downtown and Triangle Town Center. So I do just want to touch on call it 3 inconsistencies or issues that were identified, call it the future land use map, the frontage, and connectivity. So this site is currently zoned industrial, IX3. So very already, clearly inconsistent with the high density residential future land use map designation. Going to CX eliminates those industrial uses. It allows the high density residential uses along with some office and retail. As John mentioned, we have conditioned retail to be in a mixed use building, or we also wanted to preserve the ability to reuse the existing structure for retail. This site is owned by a Grub Ventures related entity. You might be aware kind of what they've done at Dock 1053 in Ironworks, as well as across the street within the Ironworks proper with some existing buildings. So they did want to preserve the ability of, and they thought retail was appropriate given proximity to the greenway, to be able to create a neat space if that's what the market calls for. So we tried to address both, in the case of full-scale redevelopment and certainly ground floor of a mixed-use building, but did want to preserve the ability to reuse some of the existing buildings on site. And I would just say there's really nothing about this site, its context, that suggests that it's really not appropriate for retail or office. We're not proximate to any low-density residential. Obviously, we have industrial to our west, well buffered to residential, high-density residential to our north. So it seems like this site is suitable for those mix of uses. With regard to the issue of frontage, again, we have tried to address the frontage aspects with a build-to pedestrian entrances condition, location restrictions on parking. Again, this site, there really is no context for this site in terms of urban form. Nothing's going to get developed, across Ratchford Drive because of the interchange. Nothing is going to get developed immediately north because of the stream and just the distance to relatively new residential. And again, you've got Capitol Boulevard to your south. So it's a very kind of island in that way. We're also balancing how to address Ratchford, knowing that we do have Crabtree Creek on our backside, and so naturally that's going to force kind of development towards Ratchford. We are trying to address Ratchford, the fact that the Greenway is now along Ratchford Drive by requiring an amenitized outdoor amenity area along Ratchford, adjacent to where the bike lane is now. Additionally, we've added a condition for a bike share location, which we would also expect to be located there. So finally, on the issue of connectivity and this connection to, Ratchford Drive. So essentially the rezoning as conditioned, we've added a trip generation condition that limits trip generation of development to 423 trips in the AM peak as well as the PM peak. as conditioned, the rezoning does not necessitate that Ratchford connection. If you look on page 6 of the staff TIA memo, it provides you a table of levels of service without the Ratchford Drive connection. And some of the labels are a little odd, I'll acknowledge, but the proposed build and proposed build with improvements, those are essentially the as conditioned development allowance. So as we've conditioned the case to 423 peak hour trips, what you see is that without the Ratchford connection, we maintain acceptable levels of service at all the studied intersections, and particularly that at Ratchford, Capitol, and Yonkers, as well as the individual approaches as well. And so redevelopment of this site does not necessitate that connection. And as staff acknowledged, the intersection of Ratchford and Capitol is not within the floodway, it's not within the 100-year floodplain. And even though that's our only point of access without the connection, again, that is not within the floodplain. I'll reference you to a recent case that you all saw just southwest of here, west of here, off of Hodges Street and Paula Street, the old ice rink. You know, that property solely had access onto Hodges. Well, Hodges is actually in the floodway under the new maps. It was under the old maps as well. But that was its sole point of access. And that rezoning allowed for significant upzoning in intensity. So I just want to put the Planning Commission at ease that y'all wouldn't be doing anything unusual, wouldn't be creating an unsafe scenario by approving this rezoning, as well as the flood data suggested that that intersection is not flooded within the last 15 years and actually hasn't even gotten within 5 feet of the elevation of that intersection. Staff report notes, kind of seems to suggest that maybe we ought to add a condition that some of this might be reimbursable. I want to just advise the commission that reimbursement, if we were to enter into a reimbursement agreement, that's over a 5 to 10 year period. That's only in the event that the city has the money to reimburse us. So if we reach the end of our term and we haven't been repaid, too bad for us. We don't get repaid. I'll also note that it's not based on actual costs. It's only based on unit costs. And so when you have the potential for a bridge or even a culvert in this location, the actual costs are well in excess of the reimbursable unit cost. The staff report also acknowledges that this might be a good opportunity for a public-private partnership. We don't disagree with that. But what we don't want to do is to essentially undercut our position, our bargaining position on terms for a public-private partnership, especially for a connection that's not necessitated as part of this rezoning. And so while that ability to enter into a public-private partnership is still on the table, we're just not in a position to add a condition that essentially requires that and then impacts the applicant's bargaining position in that manner. So with that, again, we think this is a unique site that is suitable for the height and the intensity, especially as conditioned, and maintains infrastructure sufficiency and takes advantage of the proximity to the greenway and to the transit that's there. So with that, we're happy to address any questions the commission may have.
Thank you. I'm going to assume there are no members of the public here to speak on this item. So we're going to move right into questions and comments from commissioners.
I'll kick off with one. I recall looking at areas very close to here when we were doing the Midtown Waterfront District, Midtown Area Plan, and I just pulled that area plan, and it looks like there were also Crabtree Creek land use recommendations. I'm not clear whether it was from this plan or if those were different land use recommendations. And in this plan, anyway, it I believe says that this parcel was recommended to be high-density residential. Is that right?
That may just be the base map in the map you're looking at is the future land use map. So the current designation on the future land use map for this parcel is higher scale residential is the new name that we have for it. But yeah, I believe that might just be that was the background map that was used within that map.
And could you remind me, did that area plan, the Waterfront District, did that go all the way to west of Atlantic Avenue, north of Hodges Street, all the way to 401? It did not. It stayed. It stopped at Atlantic.
Yeah, I think it stopped at Atlantic Avenue was the eastern boundary, and then the west end was Wake Forest Road, or slightly past Wake Forest, I believe.
Gotcha. I'm trying to envision this in the context of a different waterfront district that may be happening long block to the west someday.
That's a good point. Did I see another hand? Commissioner Bennett?
So Mr. Birch somewhat alleviated my concern. Thank you. But it still exists a little bit. And I'll admit, it may be, my concern may be coming from being recently traumatized when my daughter got stuck in a flash flood. So when I read that the single point of access could be an issue in flood events. I mean, I realize this isn't in a floodway, but it looked like the floodway was very close. And so that kind of concerned me, even though you're saying you're limiting the trips. Yeah, so I don't know if you or staff or someone, I was just concerned that if there's a single point of access, there could be an issue if we had flooding.
I'll take the first cut and then
Okay.
defer to John or others. So just a note on this map. So this blue area here is the floodway. And I'll note that that represents the floodway going under the bridge on Capitol Boulevard. The intersection is here with Ratchford and Capitol. Okay. So we are outside the floodway. We are outside the 100-year floodplain. We are kind of between the 1% chance and 0.02% chance. And that's kind of based on future conditions, assuming some upstream, redevelopment. I'll note that based on our measurements from, call it the top of bank to the elevation of the intersection is between 12 to 14 feet between the top of bank at, call it 188 elevation, and the intersection at about 202 elevation. And the gauge, staff can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the gauge is down in this area here. Has noted that, one, the intersection has never flooded in the past 15 years, never been overtopped, and has only come within 5 feet 3 times. And that's 5 feet given the kind of width of this floodplain area, right? So, I mean, that's a significant amount of more water that would be required to even get up that additional 5 feet. So, again, we don't believe that that's an issue. There are, again, I cite you other examples of where the only points of access require. That doesn't make it right. But here, we're not even in the floodway or the floodplain. So.
what Michael has said is accurate. I think the data that we have suggests that this location is not at significant risk for flooding that would impair access to this site. And so really, I think this is background information to give you a sense of the context of the area. I don't think that there is, you'll note that there are no policies from the comprehensive plan that are referenced as inconsistent in relation to this issue because the data do not support it being really an impact that would be known to occur. And so just wanted it to be, that information to be available to you in case you were curious about that.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions?
I have a few comments. I think that road connection is important regardless of our flood risk. The Ratchford Road connection through to, I can't remember the name of the street to the north. Transportation has been looking at that connection for quite a while, and it's important for walkability and connectivity through the whole Midtown area. And I think it's included as part of the Midtown Small Area Plan as a desired connection for the grid in that area. So it would be great to see some sort of increase in the incentive for the development to come through with that public-private partnership. I understand your position, Mr. Birch. I'm not sure exactly what kind of language would be satisfactory, but as I understand it now, what the idea is that we could do this rezoning and then the developer would, at their discretion, pursue a agreement with the city if they determine it to be in their best interest. It would be great to see some sort of further incentive, maybe tying some of the height allowance to coming through with a agreement like that. I have some concerns about the Greenway Trail. This is going to be a significant portion of our Greenway Trail, and it's going to be one of the first commercial and kind of like urban Greenway Trail sections that the city does. And I think we deserve to put more thought into what the interface will look like. I have a question for Ms. Conlon. I don't believe that this street section, if it requires upgrades due to a tiered site development plan, calls for a bike lane, an above-the-curb bike lane. So my understanding is that the development would be responsible for upgrading to the current street plan, which would just be like an access kind of street, if that's right, if I'm looking at my streets correctly here. Do we know what would be required as far as replacing the Greenway Trail as it currently stands? Would that be they would replace the street as it is in the street plan, which I don't think the street plan has a Greenway Trail in the T3 map. Is that how that works? How would that get rebuilt, and to what standard would it be rebuilt?
So, looking at the staff report, the Ratchford Drive is designated as a 2-lane undivided avenue.
So it would get a bike lane, it's a one-way bike lane.
It would get a one-way bike lane behind the curb, and staff would certainly work to preserve or improve the greenway facility there, but that's what kind of the code would require.
Okay. It would be wonderful if we could have some conditions that speak to the condition of what that Greenway Trail would look like after a major site redevelopment. And honestly, it would be great to have some sort of agreement with the city about what that whole interface would look like, and some collaboration with the Parks Department about how this interface works. I'm really super excited. I think this is a great opportunity to develop the Greenway Trail as a destination to help the city in a bunch of different ways. I'd like us to put some real thought into how this interfaces with the Greenway Trail. And I'll bring up part of the staff report said that one of the ways we could improve it would be to put further restrictions on the kind of vehicular surfaces that are allowed between Ratchford Drive and any subsequent development. So I think that's worth checking into as well. Thank you.
Would the applicant like to respond to any of those?
Yes. So just on the Greenway issue, it's been, and we've kind of been in this process around a year plus. Grubb has been talking with Parks and Greenway staff about this area generally for a much longer time, given everything going on at Ironworks. What's, I think, hard on all of the parties is staff isn't even sure what they want the future of the Greenway to be. whether it's along Ratchford or whether they want to put it back on the creek side, but just at a higher elevation. And so that's just been, somewhat of an obstacle to having very detailed conversations about, well, are we going to design to something or condition our case to something that may not be the ultimate, location of the greenway. I think developer sees the greenway as an asset and wants to have that level of interaction. I think we try to address that through kind of an amenitized area adjacent to Ratchford. I think there will be some work with staff at the site plan stage to understand whether it's how the city, what they want to do within their right of way versus above curb. I do think that we could do some additional work on conditioning what's within or what's between Ratchford, call it the street and the building. Right now, knowledge that the condition is a little open-ended in terms of, yes, we've limited the types of parking, but we really haven't spoken to the size or scope of that. Of course, it's limited by the build to, but I think that's something that we've probably got a higher level of confidence in addressing, is kind of that, limiting the parking between the building and the street a little bit more.
To follow up on that, I appreciate it. As an example for my fellow commissioners, there used to be a buffered bike lane along St. Albans before the new Midtown East construction started. And when the developer upgraded that road, he brought it to the current standards, or they brought it to the current standards, which did not include the buffered bike lane. And so we kind of had a downgrading of that facility. And I don't think it would be appropriate to have the street put in an above the curb bike lane and then have the city have to worry about putting in a two-way multi-use path right next to a one-way bike lane, right next to a sidewalk, all in the city right-of-way. So it could be that we remove a condition could be to remove that part of the streetscape requirement for a bike lane in addition for creating a multi-use path. But if there would be something that could give us some certainty about how this trail is going, honestly, I don't think the plastic pylons are befitting of our wonderful greenway system. So it would be great to see something a little bit more permanent and attractive put in there. That's what Doug Johnson from the Appearance Commission has been beating that drum a lot. I don't know if y'all know him, but he came to the BPAC last week too and was really interested in this site in particular. So maybe we can continue some of these discussions offline.
I agree. And so it does sound like there's some additional work on conditions you're contemplating right now. Our next meeting is October 11, and I believe the one after that is October 25.
We'd like the opportunity to come back on the 11th. We know kind of the timeline we're under on that. We've kind of already been doing some work on the parking condition, but we'll get with Mr. Otwell on the Greenway item as well.
Excellent. Are there any additional comments on this before I defer this one? Okay. Okay. So without objection, we are going to defer this case to our October 11 meeting. All right. And then I know we are at 12:15, but I'm hoping we can at least get through the approval of the minutes, as that was the last discussion item. There's one edit to the minutes. I believe Commissioner Miller was absent at the September 13 meeting, but she is listed in the roll call of votes in some of the items. And that's the only edit I would have. Is there any additional comments on the minutes? No? Okay, seeing none, entertain a motion to approve the minutes with that edit. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes with that edit. Do I have a second? And any additional discussion? Okay. And by show of hands, those in favor and any opposed? Okay, that motion passes unanimously. All right. Just very quickly, I will run through the list of subsequent meetings. I know some of you are here, some of you are not, who chair committees. Strategic Planning Committee, the next meeting is October 13. There is an item on the agenda for that. The next Tech Change Committee meeting is October 18 at 4. There are always numerous items on those agendas. Infrastructure and Mobility, next meeting is October 12, that case. And the next Committee of the Whole is also October 27. Is there anything else for the good of the order before I refer to Mr. Crane? No? Okay, Mr. Crane.
You've got my report in your backup. I won't belabor it. Just would recognize and acknowledge there was a ton of work that was passed through the Planning Commission to the City Council, and that was acknowledged at the meeting. So the chairperson was at the meeting and received some very nice comments from the City Council. So I would reiterate that and also reinforce the fact that we've got still a fairly large backlog of work that we're going to need to push through towards the end of the year.
Thank you. Okay, if there's nothing else, I'm going to call the meeting. Thank you, everybody.